Chapter 989. Each of the 5 pseudo-saint families had their own top prodigies. Although Yin Wufeng was not weak, he was not the strongest prodigy in the Yin family. The strongest prodigy in the Yin family was the man in the blood-red robe in front of them. He was the 6th on the sword list, Yin Ju. As the 6th on the sword list, Yin Ju's strength was unquestionable. He was also undoubtedly a prodigy of the divine dwelling stage. As soon as Yin Ju arrived, Qin Lang's expression changed. Although he was not weak, he obviously could not be compared to the divine dwelling stage prodigy and the 6th on the sword list. Is that the 6th on the sword list? Yi Guqian glanced at Yin Ju from under his hood. His aura was vigorous, and he was indeed not weak. But he could not make Yi Guqian feel the slightest bit of fear. Yin Ju did not say a word. He just glanced at the people of Sacred Cliff College and crossed his arms in front of his chest. However, this silence made Qin Lang and the others feel even more pressured, and they were a little breathless. TSK, what's wrong? You don't have anything to say now that brother Yin Ju is here. Sister Zimo, aren't you very naughty and can't control your mouth? Why don't you say something? Yin Lin smiled proudly with one hand on the corner of her mouth. You. Zimo was so angry that her face turned red, and she gritted her teeth. However, the pressure brought about by Yin Ju was simply too great. Sigh, it's a pity that Sacred Cliff College doesn't have a top prodigy. Yes, if the sword monk Xuanlian or Dugu Wubai were here, the situation might be reversed. Some of the surrounding warriors shook their heads slightly when they saw this scene. Seeing Zimo being humiliated, Qin Lang was also very angry. But he also felt helpless. He was a Silver Emblem disciple, and his strength was nothing in front of Yin Ju. If Brother Dugu was here, you wouldn't be so presumptuous. Zimo reprimanded. Humph. However, this sentence made Yin Ju's cold eyes flash with a cold light. He took a step forward and snorted coldly. The pressure of a divine dwelling stage expert spread out. Cough. On Sacred Cliff College's side, Qin Lang, Zimo, and the others were forced to step back. However, there was only one person who stood in place, unmoving like a mountain. Yin Ju's eyes narrowed slightly. He never thought that there would actually be someone in the Divine Cliff Academy's team that could withstand his pressure. It's him. Yin Lin and Yin Su's eyes met. Just now, Yi Guqian was behind Qin Lang and the others, so Yin Lin and the others did not notice. Brother Yin Ju, he's the one who attacked. Yin Lin pointed at Yi Guqian with a sinister look in her eyes. If Yi Guqian had not stopped him, Zimo would have been the one injured, not him. This person. Yin Ju's eyes narrowed. He felt that he could not see through this cloaked person. Young master. Zimo's pretty face was also slightly shocked. She did not expect Yi Guqian to be able to resist Yin Ju's divine dwelling stage pressure. Qin Lang was also shocked. There was a look of surprise in his eyes. How dare you meddle in my Yin family's business? Yin Ju's body was surrounded by true qi. Seeing Yin Ju's actions, a large group of people gathered around were secretly shocked. Could it be that Yin Ju was going to make a move against the God Cliff Academy? Sigh. Yi Guqian secretly sighed. Although he did not want to expose his identity, he could not watch Sacred Cliff College be humiliated. Just when Yi Guqian was about to attack, a clear and cold voice was heard. Stop it, Yin Ju. The Sword Catacomb is a place for enlightenment, not a place for fighting. If you want to fight, wait until the 5 academies competition. In the distance, a group of beautiful women slowly walked over. The leader was a woman in a palace dress. She had a curvaceous figure and fair skin. Her light blonde hair added a sense of nobility to her. She was Suki Miyazaki from Tianxian College. Tianxian College is here. It seems that Yin Ju can't do anything, some warriors said. Tianxian College was also on the side of independent cultivators because of Wu Hongyan. Suki Miyazaki was ranked 8th on the sword ranking. Although she was slightly weaker than Inju, there was not a big gap between them. If Suki Miyazaki intervened, Inju would not be able to deal with Sacred Cliff College. For Suki Miyazaki's sake, I'll let you go for now. Inju was very straightforward. Qin Lang, Zimo, and the others sighed in relief. Yiguchin did not care. It was best if he did not have to do anything. At this moment, Inju spoke again, although I can let you go, this path belongs to the Yin family. Inju pointed to a path inside the sword catacomb. There were many paths from the outside to the inside of the sword catacomb. Some paths did have slightly weaker sword aura. Although it was not obvious, it could last longer if the sword aura was slightly weaker. That path belongs to Sacred Cliff College. Zimo clenched her fists so tightly that her knuckles turned white. That path had slightly weaker sword aura. The surroundings had always belonged to Sacred Cliff College. But now, Inju's words directly wanted to take it for himself. Tisk, even if I give it to you, you can only go 3,000 feet deep. If we follow Brother Inju, we can go at least 4,000 feet deep. Yin Lin sneered. Qin Lang's face turned pale. Yin Lin's words were undoubtedly a humiliation to him, the leader of the team. If you are unhappy, you can attack. But even if Suki Miyazaki blocks me, I can still make you pay the price. Inju said coldly. On the other side, Suki Miyazaki frowned slightly but did not say anything. She had already helped Sacred Cliff College block Inju's attack. She had already done her best. Suki Miyazaki did not want to fight with Inju. It would affect her performance in the sword catacomb. Therefore, Sacred Cliff College had no choice but to suffer some losses. We choose another path. Qin Lang's chest rose and fell violently. His face was red from holding back his humiliation. Brother Qin Lang. The surrounding Divine Cliff College disciples were so angry that they felt as if their organs were burning. As for Zimo, her eyes were slightly red. As a girl, she could not bear such humiliation. But even if she could not bear it, she had to. Let's go in, Inju said calmly. He directly stepped onto the path of Sacred Cliff College. Looks like you won't even be able to go 2,000 feet deep today, Yin Lin said sarcastically. Zimo's shoulders trembled slightly when she heard that. If there are no top prodigies around, you'd better not clash with the Yin family, Suki Miyazaki said calmly. She also led the Tianxian College team and chose another path to enter. Let's go in too. Qin Lang exhaled deeply and waved his hand. However, his words did not elicit any response. The entire Divine Cliff College team withered like a frosted eggplant. Zimo's eyes were red. She looked directly at Qin Lang and said, Brother Qin Lang, Zimo would rather fight with the Yin family than suffer such humiliation. Sister Zimo, the situation is beyond our control. Qin Lang was also a little embarrassed. Obviously, his image in Zimo's heart had been greatly reduced. There was probably only one person in the entire Divine Cliff College team who was still calm. Let's choose a path to enter. Maybe we can surpass the Yin family, an indifferent voice rang out. It was Yi Gu Chen who had spoken. He did not care which path they chose. To him, any path was the same. There was no difference. Chapter 990. Hearing Yi Guchen's words, Qin Lang frowned. He was already in a difficult position, and Yi Guchen's words were like a stab to his heart. Setbacks aren't scary. What's scary is ignorance. You don't know how powerful Inju is, and you don't know how difficult it is to enter the sword catacomb. Qin Lang's face darkened. In his opinion, being able to bring Yi Guchen with him was already a great gift. However, Yi Guchen didn't know what was good for him and said something about surpassing the Yin family. Wasn't he mocking him? Even Zmo couldn't help but wipe the tears from the corners of her eyes, forcing a smile as she said, Many thanks for young lord's comforting words. This time it was indeed our loss, but next time, if senior brother Dugu and the others come, I will definitely make the Yin family pay the price. From her words, it was clear that Zimo also thought that Yiguchin didn't understand the situation in the sword catacomb, which was why he said such ignorant words. Yiguchin shook his head slightly and didn't say anything else. Let's go in. Qin Lang waved his hand and didn't say anything else. Young master, don't fall behind. Zimo also came back to her senses and tried to regain her composure. No matter what, the next step was to cultivate in the sword catacomb. I'm really curious. Which team will be able to enter the depths of the sword catacomb this time? Seeing so many teams set off, some of the sword cultivators around the sword catacomb also cast curious gazes. Of course, it's the Yin family's team. After all, Yin Ju, who is ranked 6th on the sword leaderboard, is there. Suki Miyazaki's strength is also not weak. If Mu Xingzu hadn't risen to power, she might have been the trump card of the entire Tianxian College. Many sword cultivators were whispering to each other. As for the team from Sacred Cliff College, because they didn't have a prodigy leading them, and because they had lost their familiar path, it was one disaster after another. Everyone thought that Sacred Cliff College might not even be able to reach 3,000 feet. As soon as he stepped into the sword tomb, Yiguchin could feel the pressure from the surroundings. He seemed to be able to hear the buzzing sound in his ears. Everyone, focus. Don't let your emotions affect you. I'll lead the way. Qin Lang walked at the front of the group. Next were Zimo and the other disciples of the Divine Cliff. Yiguchin brought up the rear. Although Qin Lang was targeting Yiguchin because of his relationship with Zimo, Yiguchin didn't really care about Yiguchin. However, he still took care of the other students of Sacred Cliff College. At this moment, Qin Lang released his true qi, forming a transparent shield to protect the other disciples. The first 1,000 feet was not too difficult. Even some rogue cultivators could enter by themselves. Yiguchin also walked safely at the back. He was not in a hurry. Instead, he was comprehending the Taoist rhymes of the sword tomb. There were countless ancient swords around him. The sword-based Taoist rhymes were almost catching up with the sword soul cave in the college. As expected of the sword tomb. It's only 1,000 feet, but the effect is almost comparable to the sword soul cave. Yiguchin's eyes were also filled with joy. The only chance to transform the lightning sword Dao was in the sword tomb. Moreover, the first time one entered was the most profound and the effect was the greatest. Yiguchin must not miss this opportunity. However, after going 1,000 feet, the speed of the Divine Cliff team slowed down significantly. Yiguchin could also feel that the pressure of the sword had almost doubled. Of course, the effect of the sword-based Taoist rhymes had also doubled. It had already surpassed the sword soul cave. Damn it! We're not familiar with this path. Qin Lang's face was slightly gloomy. They were most familiar with the path of Sacred Cliff College. They had walked it many times. However, this path was somewhat unfamiliar. The pressure of the sword aura was even stronger. On the other hand, under the lead of Yin Ju, the Yin family quickly went deeper into the sword tomb. Suki Miyazaki's team also quickly went deeper into the sword tomb. TSK. I told you that Sacred Cliff College would not make it this time. Some of the warriors looked into the distance and could also see the movements of the other teams. After a full 2 hours, the team led by Qin Lang only went deeper into the sword tomb. Not long after they went deeper into the sword tomb, countless sword auras swept across the void in front of them. Oh no, we've encountered the sword aura tide. Damn it! Qin Lang saw the sword auras coming toward them and cursed angrily. Boom! The sword aura tide collided with Qin Lang's true energy shield and blasted them back. Zimo and the others hurriedly spread out their true energy to resist the sword aura tide. There were countless ancient swords in the sword tomb. When the sword aura accumulated for a long time, it would produce the sword aura tide. The sword aura tide would never appear on the path of Sacred Cliff College. Damn it! Some of the disciples cursed. The sword aura tide only happens occasionally. It won't last long. Let's get through it. Qin Lang shouted. Everyone channeled their true energy and advanced forward. Of course, it also consumed a lot of energy. Yiguchen was at the back, so he was not affected much. What a strange place. Yiguchen was still in the mood to observe the sword aura tide. After a quarter of an hour, everyone finally broke through the sword chi tide. However, the consumption of true energy and energy was also huge. No, it seems that we can't break through the sword tomb at the sword tomb. Qin Lang panted. They were now at the sword tomb, which was not as good as the sword tomb. However, it was still enough for them to cultivate. Regardless of whether they were willing or not, they could only stop and make do with their cultivation. In the other two places, Suki Miyazaki and the Yin family knew about the Divine Cliff team's progress. Yin Lin was very happy. She was gloating. Suki Miyazaki shook her head. She could not help the Divine Cliff team now. I'm sorry that we couldn't bring you to the sword tomb. Zimo apologized to Yiguchen. The sword tomb was a watershed. After the sword tomb, the sword-based Taoist rhyme would be twice as strong. The cultivation effect would also be better. Oh, are you willing to stop here? Yiguchen smiled faintly. What do you mean? The surrounding Sacred Cliff College disciples all looked at Yiguchen. Qin Lang also frowned and said, we have indeed failed this time. However, we have brought you so deep. Ordinary itinerant cultivators can't reach this far, right? Qin Lang felt that Yiguchen was a little greedy. Heh. If you don't mind, you can follow me deeper. Yiguchen did not explain anything. He continued to walk towards the depths of the sword tomb. Is he crazy? How far can he go without our protection? Qin Lang frowned. He was a little unhappy. Zimo's almond-shaped eyes flashed. Then, she resolutely followed Yiguchen's footsteps. Junior Zimo, you. Qin Lang and the other disciples were a little stunned. Did Zmo actually believe that cloaked man who covered his head and tail? Follow them. Qin Lang's expression darkened as he followed the others. They all thought that their cultivation in the sword tomb was going to be a failure. However, after walking for a while, everyone in the Divine Cliff team was a little stunned. Why do I feel that the pressure of the sword chi has weakened a lot? Yeah, what's going on? Qin Lang and the others were all in disbelief. They did not even know how to react for a while. Zimo's beautiful eyes looked at the silent figure in front of them. The gazes of Qin Lang and the other disciples also landed on the figure who was calmly walking forward. Chapter 991. Could it be him? How could it be? Qin Lang shook his head. He did not believe it at all. He could not imagine how Yiguchen could withstand the pressure of the sword chi in the sword tomb. That feeling, could it be? Sword heart illumination. Zimo's almond-shaped eyes sparkled as she stared at Yiguchen's back. The rest of the people also felt a sword-based Taoist rhyme emanating from Yiguchen's body. The Taoist rhyme seemed to be compatible with the entire sword tomb. It reduced the pressure of the sword chi around Yiguchen. How is this possible? How can the sword tomb's Taoist rhyme be so easy to comprehend? Qin Lang was shocked. He knew how difficult it was to comprehend the sword tomb's Taoist rhyme. Even if one could comprehend one or two parts of it, it would be very helpful to go deeper into the sword tomb. At that moment, Yiguchen had made use of sword heart illumination and sword demon's comprehension to comprehend some of the sword tomb's Taoist rhyme. Therefore, Yiguchen was able to reduce most of the sword chi's pressure. The 20 or so Divine Cliff Academy disciples in the surroundings were also staring at Yiguchen with a shocked expression as though they had seen a ghost. Master, you're really good at hiding your true colors. Zimo's eyes sparkled with unprecedented surprise. Although they had missed the familiar path, they had gained Yiguchen. It could be said that what they lost at the swings, they gained at the swings. Maybe this time, we can also go deeper into the sword tomb. Zimo suddenly had confidence again. Qin Lang's face darkened. He did not expect Yiguchen to be so capable. What made him most upset was that the entire team could only rely on Yiguchen. Humph, how long can you last? Qin Lang snorted in his heart. He was not convinced. In his opinion, Yiguchen could not last long with his comprehension. A quarter of an hour later, Yiguchen led the Divine Cliff team deep into the sword tomb. Within this range, the sword aura's pressure increased explosively once again, and the clanging sounds of swords could be heard incessantly. Even Yiguchen felt some pressure. As for the others, although Yiguchen was sharing some of the pressure, there were still some disciples with weaker cultivations who were sweating profusely. Some of them couldn't hold on any longer. Let's cultivate here, the disciples said, their faces pale. They were already satisfied that they were able to reach a depth of 3,000 feet. Next, Yiguchen continued to delve deeper. On the other side, the Yin family and the Tianxian College had already penetrated the 40,000 feet mark. What? Sacred Cliff College is still going deeper. After learning about the movements of Yiguchen and the others, Yin Lin and Yin Su found it somewhat inconceivable. However, they were not too surprised. They only thought that the Divine Cliff team was lucky. As time passed, Yiguchen finally reached the 40,000 feet mark. At this moment, even Qin Lang's eyes were filled with extreme shock and disbelief when he looked at Yiguchen. Yiguchen had led them deep into the 40,000 feet mark. Zimo was also a little dumbfounded. She had previously promised that she would lead Yiguchen into the 30,000 feet mark. It turned out that he did not need any help at all. He could go deep into the 40,000 feet mark and even lead them along. At this moment, even Qin Lang could not hide the embarrassment on his face. When he recalled his arrogant attitude towards Yiguchen, he felt like he had been slapped in the face. At this moment, all the surrounding Sacred Cliff College disciples completely understood. Regardless of the cloaked man's strength, at least in terms of swordsmanship, his talent was absolutely superb. Young master, why don't you join our Sacred Cliff College? After reaching the 40,000 feet mark, Zimo's pretty face was also filled with excitement. She could not help but ask Yiguchen to join them. There's no need. Yiguchen smiled faintly. He was originally a disciple of the Holy Emblem of Sacred Cliff College. There was no need for him to join them. However, Zimo clearly misunderstood. She thought that Yiguchen refused to join them. A hint of disappointment appeared in her almond-shaped eyes, but it was quickly erased. What, they went deep into the 40,000 feet mark under that guy's lead? After hearing this news, Yin Lin's face turned very ugly. Her heart was stifled. It seems that the cloaked man is indeed a little interesting. Yin Ju's tone was indifferent. Although Yiguchen's performance was beyond his expectations, the 40,000 feet mark was still within the acceptable range. In the following period of time, more and more team members stopped at the same place. This was because after the 40,000 feet mark, the pressure of the sword chi in the sword catacomb had reached an extremely terrifying level. It was not only Yiguchen's team. On the Yin family's side, other than Yin Ju, only Yin Lin, Yin Su, and a few other people were still going deep into the sword catacomb. On the Tianxian College's side, only Suki Miyazaki and a few other people were left. 60,000 feet. The Yin family's people have broken through 60,000 feet. Some people had been paying attention to the situation in the sword catacomb. When they saw that Yin Ju and the others had broken through 60,000 feet, it caused an uproar among the warriors in the periphery. Suki Miyazaki has also broken through 50,000 feet. How is this possible? Is that the Sacred Cliff College team? When some warriors looked into the distance and saw Yiguchen and the others, their faces were filled with astonishment. They did not expect that the Sacred Cliff College team could also break through 50,000 feet. Even if the Yin family did not occupy the path, the Divine Cliff College team should not have been able to go deep into the sword catacomb. Qin Lang did not have the ability to do so. It's that cloaked man. He's leading the way. Some sharp-eyed warriors could not help but shout. Everyone in the periphery of the sword catacomb began to pay attention to Yiguchen. Inside the sword catacomb, Zimo, who had been following behind Yiguchen, was in a daze. She felt as if she was in a dream. It's already 50,000 feet. Qin Lang also swallowed hard. Now, only the two of them were following behind Yi Guchen. The rest of the people had settled down to cultivate along the way. Who is this person? Qin Lang began to feel uneasy. Then, Yi Guchen finally reached the edge of 60,000 feet. This was also a big challenge. Looking around, within 60,000 feet of the sword catacomb, there were countless sword auras that formed a sword wall. It was difficult for ordinary people to break through. Even Suki Miyazaki was stuck at this level. This is as far as I can go. Zimo's face was wet with sweat. Her chest was heaving up and down. She was almost at her limit. Qin Lang could not hold on any longer. He could only stop there. Well, I'm going in. Yi Guchen's pace was obviously not going to stop there. Master, you have to be careful. Zimo said with concern. 60,000 feet. Even some of the geniuses on the sword catacomb may not be able to break through. Qin Lang also stared at Yi Guchen's back. It's not difficult. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. He took a step forward, and a five-colored sword light burst out, enveloping Yi Guchen's body. In an instant, the power of the five elements rotated endlessly. It was the Peerless Five Elements Sword Principle. That's the Peerless Sword Principle. Zimo and Qin Lang were shocked. The Peerless Sword Principle was not something that ordinary sword cultivators could possess. Yi Guchen did not display the Five Elements Sword Principle in the Sword Dynasty. Therefore, he did not have to worry about exposing his identity when he displayed it at this moment. Yi Guchen directly broke through the 60,000 feet barrier with the power of the Five Elements Sword Principle and stepped inside. Chapter 992. Watching Yi Guchen's figure step into the 60,000 feet mark, Qin Lang and Zimo's eyes were filled with shock. They were certain that Yi Guchen was comparable to the top 10 geniuses on the sword roll. I can't believe that I actually threatened such a person. Qin Lang felt cold sweat trickling down his back as he recalled the conversation he had with Yi Guchen and the hostility he had shown towards him. He was glad that Yi Guchen was not an extreme person. Otherwise, Qin Lang would be in deep trouble. Who exactly is this young master? Zimo muttered to herself. She could not hide the curiosity in her eyes. Qin Lang watched from the side. Although he was unwilling, there was nothing he could do. Yi Guchen's performance had completely shocked him. That person actually broke through to 6,000 feet. Gong Lu Yu's jade-like face revealed a look of surprise when she heard the news. She had not paid much attention to Yi Guchen before. Now that Yi Guchen had stood out, he was the center of attention. After entering the 60,000 feet mark, Yi Guchen also felt the pressure of the powerful sword aura. Even when Yi Guchen released the illuminated sword heart and resonated with the sword tomb's Taoist rhymes, it could not reduce the pressure. Furthermore, this was only 6,000 feet. However, the effort is equal to the gain. The Taoist rhymes here are indeed much stronger than before. Yi Guchen could also feel the strong Taoist rhymes. He could not wait to sit down and start comprehending the Taoist rhymes. However, Yi Guchen resisted because he was ambitious. 60,000 feet was definitely not his goal. On the other side, the Yin family team had also entered the 60,000 feet mark. However, after entering, it was very difficult to advance 1 foot. This should be the end of most of the top 10 geniuses on the sword roll. As for the 70,000 feet mark, only Jian Shisan was cultivating. However, Jian Shisan was the sword son. Even among the sword sons, he had a chance to compete for the position of Jiankui. Yin Ju was not as good as Jian Shisan. Therefore, it was very difficult for Yin Ju to walk the 60,000 feet mark. Yin Lin and Yin Su also stopped at 50,000 feet. However, they were not in a good mood. How is that possible? That kid is so powerful. He even brought that bitch Zimo into the 50,000 feet mark. Yin Lin was so angry that her chest heaved up and down. She was obviously unwilling to accept this. However, this should be his limit. No matter how strong he is, he can't compare to big brother Inju, In-su vowed solemnly. On the other side, Suki Miyazaki finally broke through the 60,000 feet mark. However, after entering the 60,000 feet mark, she was obviously not strong enough. He's too strong. Who is that cloaked man? He's not weaker than Inju and Suki Miyazaki. Outside the sword catacomb, many warriors were watching. Inju and Suki Miyazaki were ranked 6th and 8th respectively on the sword roll. Neither of them were ordinary people. However, the cloaked man was able to keep pace with the two of them. Didn't that mean that he was also in the top 10 of the sword roll? Where did this person come from? Many warriors were incredulous. I'm curious. How far can this person go? I don't think he can go beyond 70,000 feet. It's too difficult to break through 70,000 feet. Many warriors shook their heads. As time passed, Yiguchin also kept moving forward. 63,000 feet, 65,000 feet, 67,000 feet, Inju and Suki Miyazaki could no longer hold on. Suki Miyazaki stopped at 64,000 feet. Inju, on the other hand, stopped at 66,000 feet. They couldn't go any further and could only cultivate where they were. How is this possible? That person is still moving forward. Is he going to break through 70,000 feet? Suki Miyazaki was so surprised that she couldn't close her mouth when she heard the news. As for Inju, his face was also extremely cold. In-lin and In-su were also angry, but at the same time, they couldn't help but feel afraid. Finally, Yiguchin came to the edge of 70,000 feet. Looking around, the entire 70,000 feet range was filled with countless sword chis surging in the void. It was a large tide of sword chis. It was a large tide, far stronger than the one Qin Lang and the others had encountered before. Can that person pass? Outside the sword tomb, countless people tried their best to look into the distance, wanting to know the result. Along the way, I have some understanding of the sword-based Taoist rhyme here. With the help of sword principle. Yiguchin's eyes flashed. Outside his body, 5-colored sword light surged. At the same time, Yiguchin also used edgeless sword principle again. The surrounding space was slightly distorted, and the ground sank a little. With the protection of dual sword principles and his illuminated sword heart, Yiguchin directly rushed into the 70,000 feet range. Countless ancient swords around him burst out with astonishing sword chi and swept toward Yiguchin. Yiguchin was unstoppable. He directly broke through the sword chi and went deeper. He broke through. He broke through 70,000 feet. Outside the sword tomb, countless people exclaimed. That was 70,000 feet. Even Jian Jinghong, who had the creation-level sword essence, could only go 80,000 feet. When Zimo, Qin Lang, Suki Miyazaki, In-ju, and the others heard the news, they could not help but feel shocked. Everyone was guessing who the cloaked person was. After rushing into the 70,000 feet range, the pressure of the sword had doubled. However, the sword-based Taoist rhyme also surprised Yiguchin. He could not imagine how strong the Taoist rhyme would be in the depths of the sword tomb. Yiguchin did not stop. 7,100 zhang, 7,300 zhang, 7,600 zhang. At a certain moment, Yiguchin suddenly stopped. He sensed a shocking sword essence and murderous aura flowing in front of him. The sword chi and murderous aura moved Yiguchin slightly. Yiguchin changed his direction slightly and rushed in the direction of the sword chi and murderous aura. Not long after, Yiguchin stopped. On a hill not far in front of him, there was a person sitting alone. That person was wearing a dusty gray robe and a child's toy like a ghost mask on his face. In front of him was a blood-red longsword inserted into the ground. That person was sitting cross-legged beside the blood-red longsword, as if he was comprehending something. Around him, a deathly stillness, extermination, and murderous sword intent surged. It's the lifeless sword principle. Yiguchin's eyes narrowed. That person had the peerless lifeless sword principle. As for his identity, Yi Guqin naturally knew immediately. Jian Shisan, the strongest sword son of the itinerant cultivator camp. He was considered to be qualified to compete for the position of Jiankuei. It seems that sword should be his sword, the quasi-heavenly tribulation divine weapon, the bloodbath sword, Yi Guqin muttered to himself. Even among the younger generation of the sword dynasty, Jian Shisan was ranked at the top. Just as Yi Guqin was sizing up Jian Shisan seemed to have sensed something as well. His face, which was wearing a ghost mask, slowly turned towards Yi Guqin. At this very moment, Yi Guqin's expression changed. Jian Shisan suddenly stood up, holding the bloodbath sword in his hand. He thrust his sword directly at Yi Guqin, like a peerless god of death. Terrifying sword chi spread out. It was Jian Shisan's signature move, the fatal 13 swords. Chapter 993. Jian Shisan was one of the most famous sword sons of the sword dynasty. His signature move, the fatal 13 swords, was also well known. Jian Shisan's 13 swords. These 13 moves could be said to be the most powerful killing sword moves. Together with the lifeless sword Dao, which specialized in killing, it could be said to be a perfect match made in heaven. It was no wonder that Jian Shisan had such a reputation and status. Looking at the blood-red sword that pierced toward him in an instant, as well as the astonishing killing intent, Yi Guqin instinctively flipped his hand and drew out a long sword. It was not the 9-dragon thunder prison, but another supreme-grade mystical rune weapon. The first sword. Jian Shisan opened his mouth, his voice slightly hoarse. His fatal 13 swords did not have a name, only the first sword to the 13th sword moves. But this did not hinder its power. The blood-red bloodbath sword pierced through the air, emitting a sharp whistle. It was like the god of death had passed through, stabbing toward Yi Guqin's forehead. Although he did not know why Jian Shisan suddenly attacked, Yi Guqin was not the least bit afraid. Clang! The sound of the swords colliding shook the eardrums, and even the surrounding sword chi was faintly blown away. A fierce sword chi came from the sword, and Yi Guqin's arm shook, scattering it with his inner chi. Both of them retreated a few steps at the same time. So powerful. Yi Guqin frowned slightly. Jian Shisan was indeed worthy of being called the Sword Son. His cultivation level was at least at the 3rd layer of the Divine Dwelling Realm, similar to Gu Shaoyang of the Tianhuang Plains. But Yi Guqin's current cultivation was not the same as before. Facing a 3rd layer of the Divine Dwelling Realm, he might not be able to completely resist, but at least he would not be too afraid. The second sword. Jian Shisan struck out a second time, and layers of blood-red sword shadows swept out, surrounding Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed as he used wave-like subtle steps, his figure moving through the layers of sword shadows. He struck out with his sword at the same time. The sword light was as swift as a star, directly breaking apart Jian Shisan's second move. Again, the third sword, Jian Shisan's sword momentum changed again. The chaotic blood-red sword shadows overlapped and turned into a crimson sword light that pierced towards Yi Guqin's chest. Yi Guqin's figure shook as he unleashed his 5 elements sword domain. 5-colored sword light protected his body like a lotus flower. With a loud bang, the two attacks collided. Yi Guqin retreated rapidly, his body trembling. After all, he hadn't displayed his ancient god body, nor had he used the sky-devouring secret skill to increase his cultivation. It was purely using the cultivation of the 6th stage of the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth to receive Jian Shisan's move. It could be said that with Jian Shisan's cultivation, almost no one below the divine dwelling stage among the younger generation of the Sword Dynasty could receive one of his moves. Even divine dwelling stage experts would be extremely wary of him. But Yi Guqin had received 3 of his sword moves in a row, and he hadn't even used any trump cards. Just as Yi Guqin was about to fight again, Jian Shisan stopped his sword momentum. Yi Guqin also understood that Jian Shisan's sudden attack was more of a probe than a direct attack. Brother must be the famous Jian Shisan of the Sword Dynasty. It's an honor to meet you. Yiguchen withdrew his sword and cupped his hands in greeting. No matter what, Jian Shisan was the sword son of the unaffiliated cultivator camp, and also the companion of Kenpo and the others. Yiguchen's words were also somewhat polite. Moreover, Jian Shisan's strength was indeed worthy of his respect. You are not bad. Jian Shisan's voice was hoarse. He didn't say much. But if Kenpo, Jian Shi, and the others heard this, they would certainly be extremely shocked. Because they had never heard words of praise from Sword 13's mouth. Jian Shisan had also never acknowledged anyone. Yiguchen was the first. I'm surprised to hear such words from the sword son, Yiguchen said with a faint smile. If you can continue, then go deeper. But there's no harm in telling you that if you continue on this path, you will reach the place where Sword Saint Guyun is training in seclusion. Jian Shisan said, then sat back down on the hill and stabbed the bloodbath sword back into the ground. After Yiguchen heard this, he nodded slightly and didn't change his direction. Looking at Yiguchen's figure, Jian Shisan's eyes secretly flashed under the ghost mask. Sixth level of the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth, could you be? Jian Shisan murmured in his heart. He broke through, the cloaked man has already surpassed Jian Shisan. Outside the sword catacomb, all the warriors and sword cultivators were extremely shocked. This news was like an explosion, shocking everyone's mind. Who is that person? How can he surpass Jian Shisan? Do you think he can break through the 80,000 feet range like Jian Jinghong? Is that possible? Countless exclamations and doubts rose and fell one after another. Inside the sword catacomb, Yin Ju, Yin Lin, Yin Su, and the others who heard the news were completely speechless. Especially Yin Ju, he had now come to his senses. He knew that Yiguchen was at least an expert who could contend with him. Before this, he thought that Yiguchen and the others were afraid of him. Now that he thought about it, his arrogant attitude was no different from a clown. On the other side, Suki Miyazaki was also shocked and somewhat in disbelief. No. That person should not be able to break Jian Jinghong's 80,000 feet record. Suki Miyazaki murmured in her heart. She had long regarded Jian Jinghong as her target and opponent. In her opinion, in the Sword Dynasty, there were only a few people who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Jian Jinghong. How could this cloaked man, who had randomly appeared, compare to Jian Jinghong? Around the sword catacomb, the wind and clouds were surging. Everyone was curious to see how this cloaked man, who had mysteriously appeared, would end up. Finally, Yiguchen came to the intersection of 70,000 feet and 80,000 feet. As far as the eye could see, all the ancient swords within 80,000 feet were constantly trembling, and there was no time for them to stop at all. From time to time, there would be explosive sounds in the space, and the tide of sword energy would come wave after wave, endless. What a strong pressure! At this point, Yiguchen's expression was also slightly solemn. Even with his cultivation, he felt a great deal of pressure. The pressure within 80,000 feet was twice as strong as that within 70,000 feet. Even Yiguchen had to treat it with caution. However, in his eyes, there was anticipation. The greater the pressure and obstruction, the greater the harvest in the end. If that's the case. Yiguchen's eyes flashed. From within his body, an extremely sharp sword concept spread out. Yiguchen's entire person seemed to have turned into a sword. A peerless divine sword that could cut through everything and was always victorious. It was the unity of man and sword. Whoosh! Yiguchen's footsteps swept, and directly rushed into the 80,000 feet range. Heart of the sword, the unity of man and sword, and the 5 elements sword principle and edgeless sword principle. This allowed Yiguchen to directly step into the 80,000 feet range. Boundless sword energy swept over, but Yiguchen's figure was like a long sail breaking the waves, sweeping through all obstacles. At this moment, outside the sword catacomb, the atmosphere was completely boiling. He broke through, the cloaked man broke through the 80,000 feet range. Oh my god, doesn't that mean that he's already comparable to Jian Jinghong, who has the creation level sword essence? Who is this person? Endless clamor sounded throughout the sword catacomb. Chapter 994. The Sword Vault was one of the 4 great mystic realms. It was not as good as Mount Saint Crossing, which could directly test a person's talent. However, the further one went into the Sword Vault, the higher one's cultivation talent was. This was a well-known fact. Yiguchen had stepped into the 80,000-foot range. That meant that Yiguchen was not inferior to Jian Jinghong in terms of sword talent. Who was Jian Jinghong? He was Sword Sovereign Yicheng's personal disciple, an 8th-grade prodigy, a divine dwelling realm expert, and the second on the sword ranking. He also had the creation realm sword intent. Every one of his identities was important in the sword dynasty. And now, someone who was comparable to Jian Jinghong had suddenly appeared. It was no wonder that many martial artists around the Sword Vault had lost their composure. That young master really made it through. Zimo and Qin Lang had also received the news. Zimo's pretty face was full of surprise and surprise. She did not expect that the mysterious person who had helped her out would have such talent. Qin Lang's expression was also fluctuating. His heart was even more perturbed, and there was even a trace of regret. If such a person were to join Sacred Cliff College, he would definitely become a Gold Emblem disciple immediately. It's even possible for him to become a Holy Emblem disciple. I can't believe I targeted such a person before. Thinking of his attitude towards Yiguchen, Qin Lang's face turned slightly pale. He was only a Silver Emblem disciple and could not be compared to a Gold Emblem disciple. Fortunately, Qin Lang had only provoked him verbally and did not make a move. Otherwise, Yiguchen would not have let him go so easily. On the other side, Suki Miyazaki was completely stunned. She also did not expect Yiguchen to step into the 80,000-foot range. First, it was Duga Wubai, and now it's this person. Suki Miyazaki bit her red lips. Both times, she had misjudged the person. At the same time, Suki Miyazaki felt a sense of defeat. In the past, when Jian Jinghong defeated her, she only treated Jian Jinghong as her goal. Now, she realized that whether it was the Duga Wubai from before or the cloaked man now, they were both geniuses who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Jian Jinghong. Of course, if Suki Miyazaki found out that both of them were Yiguchen, she would be even more surprised. As for the Yin family, Yin Lin and Yin Su's faces were pale. Even though Yin Ju was unwilling, he had to admit that Yiguchen was capable. Within 80,000 feet, Yiguchen didn't stop. He continued onwards. Although this result was already very good. After all, among the younger generation, Jian Jinghong was the only one who relied on his creation-level sword intent to go 80,000 feet deep. But Yiguchen was ambitious. He was unwilling to stop at 80,000 feet. The cloaked man wants to go deeper. Does he want to break Jian Jinghong's record? At this moment, Yiguchen had already gone very deep into the sword tomb. The people outside the sword tomb could only vaguely detect his movements. Hey, no, that seems to be the Solitary Cloud Sword Saint's place of seclusion. Some sharp-eyed people noticed the direction Yiguchen was going. That direction was the Solitary Cloud Sword Saint's place of seclusion. That place could be said to be one of the forbidden places in the Sword Tomb. Because everyone knew that the Solitary Cloud Sword Saint Ling Qianhen was a recluse. Any genius who entered his place of seclusion would be swept out like garbage, although he wouldn't kill them directly. Everyone was the same. There were no exceptions. Tut, what a pity. I wanted to see if the cloaked man could break Jian Jinghong's record. Yes, the Solitary Cloud Sword Saint's place of seclusion is at the edge of 90,000 feet. The cloaked man can't pass. Many warriors and sword cultivators shook their heads regretfully. That person is finally unable to move forward. Yin Ju actually felt a sense of relief. On the other side, Suki Miyazaki also shook her head. She didn't think Yiguchen could pass through the forbidden place of seclusion. Sigh, damn it. If the Yin family hadn't taken the path of our academy, young master wouldn't have come across the Solitary Cloud Sword Saint's place of seclusion. Zimo clenched her fists tightly. Her face was full of anger, as if her path was blocked. Qin Lang's face darkened when he saw Zimo's reaction. In his eyes, Zimo was paying close attention to Yiguchen. Just as the people outside were either feeling sorry for Yiguchen or gloating over his misfortune. Yiguchen finally reached the deepest part of 80,000 feet under the pressure. At this moment, Yiguchen was drenched in sweat. There were many sword wounds on his body. It was obvious that he had paid a great price to reach this place. It's 90,000 feet in front of me. Yiguchen looked up. He could feel that there was an even more terrifying sword chi in front of him. Not only that, there was another kind of pressure spreading. It was the pressure of a false saint expert. The solitary cloud sword saint's place of seclusion should be in front of me. Yiguchen's eyes flickered. If it were an ordinary person, they would rather stop than step in. The solitary cloud sword saint was a character that even the Sword Dao Alliance's leader, Proud Divine Prefecture, didn't care about. Yiguchen's gaze became firm as he made a decision. He was going to take a gamble. After making up his mind, Yiguchen continued to move forward resolutely. What? Are my eyes playing tricks on me? That cloaked man is still moving forward. How stupid must he be to go into the solitary cloud sword saint's forbidden place? Seeing that Yiguchen did not stop, the group of people outside the sword catacomb were stunned. He's really courting death. Yin Ju sneered. Yin Lin and Yin Su were also waiting for Yiguchen to be seriously injured and sent flying. Suki Miyazaki sighed softly. 80,000 feet is already an excellent place to cultivate. If you're greedy, you'll lose everything in the end. Obviously, Suki Miyazaki also thought that Yiguchen was too arrogant. If he was seriously injured and sent flying, he would not be able to last even 80,000 feet and would have to leave the sword catacomb. Zimo was completely worried about Yiguchen. The solitary cloud sword saint's place of seclusion was extremely cold. Frost and snow filled the sky. It's so cold. Yiguchen stepped in and frowned. No, it's not frost and snow. It's... Yiguchen's eyes narrowed. The frost and snow that filled the sky was more like a manifestation of the rules. Yiguchen did not receive the Saint Path Law empowerment. He did not even notice it. It seems that the solitary cloud sword saint is not too far away from the true saint realm, Yiguchen muttered to himself. As he thought, he continued to go deeper. In just a moment, Yiguchen stopped in his tracks. In front of him, the hills seemed to be sealed in ice. The ancient swords that covered the surroundings were also covered in frost and were completely frozen. In this scene of snow falling from the sky and frost on the ground, a black-robed figure sat cross-legged in the ice and snow. His long grayish-white hair was covered in a layer of frost and fell to his shoulders. His face was as sharp as a knife and was extremely cold. Two intersecting scars added a sense of loneliness and coldness. He held a sword in his arms. His entire person seemed to resonate with the world. It was the solitary cloud sword saint, Ling Qianhen. Chapter 995. Yiguchen had seen Ling Qianhen back in the infinite wasteland plains. Therefore, it was impossible for him to be mistaken. Just as Yiguchen saw Ling Qianhen's closed eyes suddenly opened. A pair of cold eyes, as cold as the stars in the sky, stared indifferently at Yiguchen. In an instant, Yiguchen felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. At the same time, a frosty hurricane seemed to have been set off in the surrounding heaven and earth, pressing down on Yiguchen. Yiguchen's body shook, feeling a terrifying pressure coming toward him. Coupled with the pressure of the sword chi that existed in the sword tomb itself, even Yiguchen felt like he was about to suffocate. Yiguchen hurriedly brought out his sword Dao and the unity of man and sword to resist the pressure. Huh? Ling Qianhen looked slightly surprised. Obviously, he did not expect Yiguchen to have such a trick up his sleeve. He first glanced at Yiguchen, and then said, "You are very brave." The meaning of his words was obviously that Yiguchen knew that this was his place of seclusion, but still barged in. Junior came here abruptly and offended Senior. Yiguchen cupped his fists slightly. No matter what, he had to ask Ling Qianhen for a favor, so he had to be polite. Knowing that this is my place of seclusion, you still chose to enter. You are indeed worthy of being Duge Wubai, the innate saint of the Sword Dynasty, who recently passed through the 20th floor of Mount Saint Crossing, Ling Qianhen said indifferently. Yi Guqin was not surprised that Ling Qianhen saw through his identity at a glance. Senior Leng has good eyesight. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. But, if you think that I'll let you off because of this, then you're gravely mistaken. Anyone who dares to disturb my cultivation can only— The solitary frost sword in Ling Qianhen's bosom trembled slightly, and a strand of sword qi shot towards Yi Guqin. Although it was only a wisp of sword qi, it was still an attack from a false saint. This move was enough to severely injure Yi Guqin. In the face of this oncoming sword intent, Yi Guqin remained completely unfazed. As expected of a divine weapon forged by a blacksmith, it is indeed sharp. The moment Yi Guqin finished speaking, the wisp of sword energy froze an inch in front of Yi Guqin before dissipating. Who are you? Ling Qianhen stared at Yi Guqin with sharp eyes. Senior Leng, you've indeed guessed my identity correctly. Unfortunately, you only know one aspect of it and not the other. Yi Guqin slowly raised his hand, revealing his face under the hood. Ling Qianhen was slightly puzzled. This face was indeed handsome, but there was nothing unusual about it. Yi Guqin smiled faintly, raised his hand, and rubbed his face slightly. The skin on his face peeled off, revealing Yi Guqin's original handsome features. You are— Even with Ling Qianhen's character, his body trembled slightly. His gaze was as sharp as a sword as he stared fixedly at Yi Guqin's face. After Yi Guqin came to the Sword Dynasty, he had been wearing a face-changing mask on his face. At this moment, he took it off for the first time. How could you be Yi Guqin? Ling Qianhen's eyes were filled with extreme confusion. In the infinite wasteland plains, Yi Guqin had escaped with the help of Su Qingyu. However, he had consumed the 9 deaths without regrets pill, which could be said to be certain death. However, now, Yi Guqin, who everyone thought had already fallen, appeared in front of Ling Qianhen. It was no wonder that Ling Qianhen was so surprised. I won't elaborate on the various twists and turns. Senior Leng, you just need to know that I'm still alive. Yi Guqin said lightly. Good method. Everyone was deceived by you alone. Even the Starry Sword Pavilion and the Heavenly God Sword Sect were deceived by you. Ling Qianhen clicked his tongue inside. But in the next moment, his expression suddenly changed, and his eyes flashed like cold stars. However, you actually have the guts to reveal your identity to me. Aren't you afraid that I will announce it, or— Ling Qianhen paused, and a faint killing intent spread out. Kill, and steal the sword. The entire Nantian region knew that Yi Guqin had the immemorial demon sword, God Devourer. That was a real immemorial famed sword. Even if it was only a Earth-ranking famed sword, it was enough to make people go crazy. Today, there were still many experts and overlord-level forces in the Nantian region who were looking for Yi Guqin's traces in order to obtain the God Devourer sword. Ling Qianhen's unsociable personality was long known, and he was also a sword cultivator. Even he was a little surprised that Yi Guqin had the courage to reveal his identity. If Senior is willing, you can do so. However, I'm sure that you won't do so. Yi Guqin smiled lightly. Oh. Ling Qianhen looked at Yi Guqin. Because of Senior's personality, I can empathize with you. Yi Guqin said. As a sword demon in his previous life, he was also a lonely person who lived alone for the sword Tao in his heart. A ferocious beast lives alone in the world. He has the pride of a swordsman. This kind of person would not do anything that would humiliate his pride. That would also destroy his state of mind. Furthermore, Senior was able to repay Senior Tianfeng's kindness back in the Tianhuang Plains. Even when faced with the threat of an overlord-level force, Senior Tianfeng remained unmoved. With such a character, you wouldn't do anything despicable. Yi Guqin spoke slowly, word by word, resolute and decisive. Ling Qianhen's expression froze, then he suddenly laughed towards the sky. His gray hair fluttered in the cold wind, and his hearty laughter shook the surroundings. Indeed. Ling Qianhen's heart was filled with the pride and arrogance of a swordsman. He was more like a solitary swordsman who only pursued the supreme sword Dao. How could such a person betray his own sword heart? If Ling Qianhen really killed someone and stole his sword Dao heart would also be shattered. Yi Guqin understood this feeling. This was also the appreciation between peerless swordsmen. Therefore, Yi Guqin took a gamble and took the initiative to reveal his identity. Interesting, Yi Guqin, I really see you in a new light. But since you came here and took the initiative to reveal your identity, I'm afraid you have something to say. Ling Qianhen took a deep look at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin was sure that with his character, he would not kill someone and steal their sword. But for no reason, Yi Guqin would not take the risk to reveal his identity. Therefore, Ling Qianhen knew that Yi Guqin must have a purpose for coming here. Yi Guqin did not avoid it, but smiled and said, to be honest, this time I came here because I have something to ask of you. Then, Yi Guqin told him some of his situation. For example, the hidden dangers of the fake saint family and so on. Of course, Yi Guqin did not say anything about the saint path law enlightenment. After listening, Ling Qianhen shook his head slightly. You don't have to say any more. First, I will not get involved in the internal disputes of the Sword Dynasty. Second, I have no obligation to provide you with protection. I do owe Mo Tianfeng a favor, but you are at most half his disciple, not him. Moreover, I have already made a move on the Tianhuang Plains, which can be considered as repaying Mo Tianfeng's favor. With Ling Qianhen's character, he would not kill someone and steal their treasure. But he was definitely not a warm-hearted kind person. Yi Guqin also knew, so he did not intend to use Mo Tianfeng's favor as a condition. When I stepped into this place, I noticed that Senior Ling's cultivation is even higher than before. I'm afraid you are not far from the realm of tribulation saints. Yi Guqin said with a smile. Ling Qianhen stared indifferently, wanting to know what Yi Guqin was going to say next. What if I say that I have a way to help Senior Ling break through to the realm of tribulation saints? Boom! Just as Yi Guqin's voice fell, Ling Qianhen's aura suddenly erupted. Wind and snow filled the sky, surrounding the wilderness. You, say it again. Chapter 996. Ling Qianhen's eyes were as sharp as swords as he stared straight at Yi Guqin. For any false saint expert, becoming a saint was always the most important thing. Only by transcending mortality and becoming a saint could one completely stand at the top of all living beings and martial arts. Ling Qianhen was no exception. People with his character were even more obsessed with becoming a saint. And now, Yi Guqin actually said that there was a way to help him break through to the heavenly tribulation saint realm. If it were anyone else, Ling Qianhen would have taken it as a joke. But Yi Guqin was different. His previous performance on the endless plains had made Ling Qianhen somewhat admire him. Therefore, he was willing to talk so much with Yi Guqin. Senior, you may think that my words are just a joke, Yi Guqin said. Indeed, if it were anyone else, I would have kicked him out long ago. Ling Qianhen calmed down. He wanted to hear what Yi Guqin could come up with. I'm sure you've heard about the legacy of the Tianqing dynasty in the ancient ruins, Yi Guqin said. You mean? Ling Qianhen frowned slightly. That's right. Rumor has it that there may be a fruit of law left behind by a saint in the legacy, which is the Saint Dao fruit. Senior, you have a deep understanding of the laws now. With the help of the Saint Dao fruit, you may be able to break through to become a heavenly tribulation saint, Yi Guqin said. Ling Qianhen fell into deep thought. His current understanding of the laws was indeed very deep. However, he was still not very confident that he could survive the heavenly tribulation. But if he could obtain the Saint Dao fruit and completely comprehend the power of the laws, his chances of surviving the heavenly tribulation would be much higher. However, all of this was based on the premise that Yi Guqin could obtain the Saint Dao fruit. What you said is indeed correct. However, firstly, is there really a Saint Dao fruit within the inheritance? Secondly, even if there is a Saint Dao fruit, it is not something you can obtain. Ling Qianhen shook his head slightly. Now, the map of the Void Sky Sacred Dynasty was in the hands of the 4 dynasties. As a rogue cultivator, Ling Qianhen would not be able to enter the treasure even if it appeared in the future because he would be blocked by the false saint experts of the other dynasties. Therefore, this is only a suggestion. In fact, there might only be a sliver of a chance. But senior, will you turn a blind eye to it? Yi Guqin continued. The goal of all false saints was to become a saint. Even if there was only a sliver of a chance, or even a 1 in a million chance, no one was willing to let it go. Ling Qianhen gave Yi Guqin a deep look. It had to be said that what Yi Guqin said made sense. Logic told Ling Qianhen that it was impossible for Yi Guqin to obtain the sage Dao fruit. But what if? It was better to be safe than sorry. If Yi Guqin really obtained the sage Dao fruit, wouldn't Ling Qianhen miss an opportunity to become a saint? Everything depends on senior. In fact, I don't want senior to be my bodyguard. I just hope that senior can lend a helping hand when I need senior's help. Yi Guqin's tone was neither servile nor overbearing. Ling Qianhen's eyes flashed with a dark light before he finally sighed. Yi Guqin, you've convinced me. In the future, regardless of whether you can obtain the sage Dao fruit or not, I will help you once. This is for the sake of Liang Tianfeng. And if you can really obtain the sage Dao fruit. Ling Qianhen wanted to continue. However, after thinking about it, it seemed that it was really impossible, so he stopped talking. Then, Ling Qianhen threw a jade slip to Yi Guqin. When you need it, just send a message through the jade slip. Ling Qianhen said and waved his hand. Yi Guqin nodded slightly and put the jade slip away in his origin ring. He knew that Ling Qianhen treated him like this only because of Liang Tianfeng. As for the sage Dao fruit, Ling Qianhen didn't have any hope at all. Yi Guqin didn't say much. In fact, he wasn't sure whether he could obtain the sage Dao fruit. Thank you, Senior Lang. After the matter was settled, Yi Guqin also left Ling Qianhen's place of seclusion and prepared to go deeper into the sword tomb. Ling Qianhen's eyes flashed as he watched Yi Guqin's departing figure. Back in the heavenly wasteland plains, I didn't play much of a role, so this time, I'll completely repay Liang Tianfeng's favor, Ling Qianhen muttered to himself. He also didn't think that Yi Guqin would find the sage Dao fruit to help him break through to the saint realm. At the edge of the sword tomb, everyone was stunned and their faces froze. What's going on? The cloaked man didn't seem to have been expelled by the solitary cloud sword saint. Not only was he not expelled, but he seems to be going deeper. What's going on? Did the sun rise from the west? All the warriors looked at each other and couldn't figure it out. Why would the aloof and arrogant Ling Qianhen allow a stranger to step into his place of seclusion and not attack him? What's going on? Who is that person? Yin Zhu clenched his fists and couldn't figure it out. How can this be? Does the cloaked man know that the solitary cloud sword saint won't attack him? On the other side, Suki Miyazaki's face was still filled with shock. That's great. Zimo, who had received the news, was very happy for Yi Guqin. As for Qin Lang, he completely dispelled all his thoughts. Only God knew where the cloaked man came from. In the depths of the sword tomb, Yi Guqin didn't know that there was already an uproar outside the sword tomb. He was still burying his head and continuing to move forward. The deepest part of 90,000 feet is just ahead. Yi Guqin looked into the distance. The deepest part of the sword tomb was 100,000 feet in front of him. It was a storm of sword auras. The intensity of the storm was far greater than the tide of sword auras from before. Let's give it a try. Yi Guqin released his sword principle and became one with the sword. He directly charged into the storm of sword auras and wanted to go deeper. However, with a puff, Yi Guqin's body was sent flying and he spat out vermilion blood. This time, he suffered quite a bit of injury. Fortunately, Yi Guqin had the perfect body and the body of an ancient god. His recovery ability was amazing, and this injury didn't affect him too much. However, it was difficult to break through the barrier of the storm of sword auras. Yi Guqin frowned and pondered. At the same time, outside the sword tomb, many warriors and sword cultivators heaved a sigh of relief. That scared me to death. I thought that the cloaked man could enter 100,000 feet. He has now left Jian Jingheng behind. If he can really enter 100,000 feet, his sword principal talent is probably not inferior to Duge Wubai, who passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. Hey, do you think that the cloaked man could be Duge Wubai? How is that possible? Duge Wubai has the Azura sword principle, and the cloaked man seems to have used the 5 elements sword principle and another kind of sword principle. Don't tell me that Duge Wubai has 3 kinds of sword principles. Indeed, I didn't think of that. The warrior who made the guess scratched his head embarrassedly. With 3 kinds of sword principles, even in the Sword Dynasty, where sword cultivators gathered, it was almost impossible to find such a person. Therefore, they directly dismissed this guess. In the sword tomb, Yin Ju, Suki Miyazaki, and the others secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At the moment when everyone thought that the mysterious cloaked man would stop at a distance of 30,000 meters, the cloaked man suddenly stopped. Yiguchen in the sword tomb sat cross-legged at the edge of the 100,000 feet. The surrounding sword-based Taoist rhymes were unusually thick, and it also caused Yiguchen's understanding of sword principle to increase rapidly. Vaguely, an extremely faint wisp of sword essence spread out. This wisp of sword essence was very ethereal. However, it was fundamentally different from all the sword essences and sword principles that Yiguchen had comprehended before. Even Ling Qianhen felt something and looked in Yiguchen's direction. At a certain moment, Yiguchen suddenly opened his eyes. His entire person seemed to have become one with the surrounding sword chi of the sword tomb. He directly walked step by step into the storm of sword chi. Chapter 997. That faint wisp of sword intent was none other than the creation-level sword Tao of all creation. Within the range of 90,000 feet, Yiguchen made use of the comprehension of the sword-based Taoist rhyme and finally comprehended a trace of sword essence of all creation. What was the sword Tao of all creation? Heaven, earth, firmament, stars, and all other things could be used as swords. Yiguchen used this wisp of sword Tao of all creation as a guide to completely integrate himself into the sword catacomb. Because of this, he was able to stroll into the storm of sword chi like this. In the end, Yiguchen's figure completely stepped into the sword catacomb. Dead silence, there was dead silence outside the sword catacomb. The sword cultivators all widened their eyes and breathed heavily as if they had seen the most unbelievable scene. Someone had entered the sword catacomb. It was not that no one had entered the sword catacomb before. However, those people were mostly the older generation of sword cultivators. Among the younger generation, only Jian Jingheng had set a record of 80,000 feet. Now, there was a younger generation that had entered the sword catacomb. This was definitely another record that would shake the sword dynasty. Oh my god! First Duge Wubai passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing, and now a mysterious genius has entered the sword catacomb. Since when did the sword dynasty have so many peerless geniuses? Yeah, who is this person? He can't be Duge Wubai. Some people said confidently. Yiguchen had already passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. If this person was Yiguchen, how could the other geniuses live? Unfortunately, that was the truth. However, no one knew who it was yet. Yin Ju, Yin Lin, Yin Su, and Suki Miyazaki were already shocked speechless. Even Zimo and the other disciples of the Divine Cliff team, who were standing on Yiguchen's side, were a little stunned. Qin Lang, on the other hand, trembled all over. He had already made up his mind that when Yiguchen came out, he would sincerely apologize and beg for Yiguchen's forgiveness. While everyone was still in shock, Yiguchen had already stepped into the 100,000-foot range. He had arrived at the true core of the sword tomb. There were countless ancient swords densely packed together in the surroundings. At the center of the swords was an ancient stone platform. That should be the place with the densest Taoist rhyme in the sword tomb. Yiguchen's eyes lit up. He was indeed ambitious when he came to the sword tomb. Not only did he want to successfully comprehend the lightning sword Tao, but he also wanted to obtain the lightning sword Tao. More importantly, he wanted to comprehend the sword intent of all creation. Only the core area in the deepest depths of the sword tomb could satisfy his needs. Yi Guqian walked towards the stone platform. Along the way, he saw that there were many sword marks on the ground. These stones had been soaked and baptized by the sword-based Taoist rhyme and sword qi all year round, forming natural sword marks on the surface. It was also very helpful for comprehending the sword Tao. There were such sword rhyme stones in the Sword Soul Cave of Sacred Cliff College. However, those sword rhyme stones were far inferior to the ones in the deepest part of the sword tomb. Yi Guqian did not stand on ceremony and put the sword rhyme stones into his origin ring. Then, Yi Guqian went forward and sat cross-legged on the stone platform. In an instant, the countless ancient swords in the sword tomb vibrated at the same time. Sword qi surged and rushed into the stars. This abnormality also spread throughout the surroundings of the sword tomb. Even the warriors in sword-leaning city could feel it. What's going on? It's coming from the sword tomb. That's sword qi rushing into the stars. Did someone enter the 100,000-foot range of the sword tomb again? Could it be a sword Tao false saint expert? Or the solitary cloud sword saint? The strange phenomenon in the sword tomb caused a huge commotion in sword-leaning city. Many warriors and sword cultivators rushed out of sword-leaning city like locusts and arrived at the sword tomb. When they found out that the person who had entered the 100,000-foot range of the sword tomb was a young genius, everyone's expression froze in shock. Could it be another dark horse like Duga Wubai? This person has two peerless sword Daos. He's indeed extraordinary. Many sword cultivators looked toward the depths of the sword tomb. Unfortunately, the 100,000-foot range of the sword tomb was covered by the sword qi storm and could not be seen. In the deepest part of the sword tomb, Yi Guqian sat cross-legged on the stone platform and began to comprehend. The moment he sat cross-legged on the stone platform, he resonated with the ancient swords in the sword tomb. What a dense Taoist rhyme! Yi Guqian was shocked. The sword-based Taoist rhyme was far superior to the 90,000-foot range from before, let alone the previous areas. Yi Guqian finally understood why everyone wanted to enter the deepest part of the sword tomb. At this moment, Yi Guqian understood something even without the help of the enlightened sword heart and the enlightened ancient tree. All kinds of sword techniques and martial arts were integrated in his heart. I'll comprehend the lightning sword Tao first. Yi Guqian made a decision. He used the enlightened sword heart, the enlightened ancient tree's help, the sword tomb's support, and the sword demon's comprehension ability. With all these factors added together, Yi Guqian's comprehension ability was off the charts and reached the peak. Although it was difficult to break through the bottleneck of the peerless sword Tao, it could not withstand Yi Guqian's terrifying comprehension ability. After a short 3 days, the surface of Yi Guqian's body was surrounded by the light of 9-colored profound lightning. The surrounding void was filled with the sound of thunder exploding. At a certain moment, Yi Guqian suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with lightning, as if they were two pools of lightning. He raised his hand and a terrifying sword qi spread out. It turned into endless lightning and gathered in the sky. Finally, it turned into a dazzling ball of lightning. The ball of lightning released an endless amount of lightning, turning the entire sword tomb into a wild lightning forbidden land. Yi Guqian was like the god of thunder descending to the world. He was extremely powerful. This was the sword domain of the lightning sword Tao. Heaven's punishment thunder prison. Yi Guqian finally understood why the lightning sword reverend sword was called the 9-dragon thunder prison. It was because the 9-dragon thunder prison was a perfect match for the sword domain of the lightning sword Tao. Yi Guqian was looking forward to seeing how powerful the two thunder prisons would be when they were stacked together. Thinking of this, Yi Guqian could not help but take out the 9-dragon thunder prison. However, to Yi Guqian's surprise, he found that the 9-dragon thunder prison had also undergone a transformation. The thunder flood dragon's soul gradually emitted a faint dragon's power. The thunder flood dragon had turned into a thunder dragon. Could it be because I absorbed the force of the tribulation at the 20th layer of Mount Saint Crossing, and now that I've fully comprehended the thunderous sword Tao, the 9-dragon thunder prison has completely evolved? Yiguchin could only think of this reason after pondering for a while. It was conceivable that when the Thunder Flood Dragon's soul became the Thunder Dragon's soul, the 9-dragon thunder prison would be the real 9-dragon thunder prison. Next, it's time to comprehend the sword essence of all creation. Yiguchin withdrew the thunder prison and began to meditate on the sword essence of all creation. Due to the obstruction of the sword chi storm, the people outside could not see Yiguchin's movements. However, this did not prevent more and more people from gathering here. As the days passed, more and more people gathered outside the sword tomb. If it were not for the 5 academies competition, perhaps more people would have come. Chapter 998. Time passed day by day, and the 5 academies competition was getting closer and closer. The entire sword dynasty was stirred up because of the 5 academies competition. While the matter of the 5 academies competition was fermenting, another matter began to spread out. A mysterious genius had stepped into the depths of the sword catacomb. The previous record was set by Jian Jinghong, who had the creation-level sword intent. Now another mysterious genius had appeared and broken Jian Jinghong's record, which could be said to have set off a storm. If not for the 5 academies competition, it would have attracted the attention of most people. The matter of the sword tomb would definitely be spread throughout the sword dynasty, just like the matter of Mount Saint Crossing. Tiandu Ridge, Hua family. Hua Wuxiu sat alone in a pavilion with a chessboard in front of him. He held a white piece in one hand and a black piece in the other. He was playing chess with himself. Who is it that stepped into the sword catacomb? Hua Wuxiu's eyes dimmed as he mumbled to himself. He had also thought that it was Dugu Wubai. However, according to the rumors, the mysterious genius did not use the Azura sword principle, but the 5 elements sword principle and another peerless level of sword principle. If it was said that Dugu Wubai had 3 peerless sword principles, even Hua Wuxiu would not believe it. In a secret place of cultivation in the sword dynasty, a bare-chested young man sat cross-legged in the endless sword chi, receiving the baptism. The young man's black hair fluttered in the wind, his eyebrows were sword-like, and his handsome face was sharp. There was a sword mark between his eyebrows, which emitted a transcendent wave of sword principle. What was strange was that although there was endless sword chi around him, it could not hurt the young man. Instead, it surrounded him as if the young man was born to be the master of the sword. To be able to break the record I set in the sword tomb, interesting. I really want to fight with this person. The young man's lips curled up into a smile, and his eyes surged with battle intent. He was the legendary second on the sword ranking, the peerless genius who had the embryonic form of the heavenly sword principle, Jian Jinghong. At this moment, in the sword tomb of the heavenly sword mountain, there were already many figures densely surrounding the sword tomb. Although there were fewer people coming to the sword tomb to watch the fun because of the 5 academies competition, there was still a dense crowd of people as far as the eye could see. TSK. That mysterious genius has been cultivating in this place for so long. Yeah, I'm really curious. Who is he? Many sword cultivators were whispering to each other. Qin Lang, Zimo, and other Sacred Cliff College students were among the crowd. After a period of cultivation, they also walked out of the sword tomb. That young master is really too amazing. I really want to know his true identity. Zimo's eyes were faintly twinkling with stars. Extraordinary talent and strength, a mysterious identity, and a hero saving the damsel in distress. It could be said that Yiguchin had fulfilled all of the little girl's fantasies. Qin Lang's face was slightly stiff, but he did not dare to have a trace of hostility toward Yiguchin. In addition, Yin Ju and the others from the Yin family also came out. Yin Ju's face was as calm as water, without a trace of expression. Yin Lin and Yin Su were no longer as arrogant as before. Instead, their faces were slightly pale, and they faintly felt fear. Suki Miyazaki from Tianxian College also came out of the sword tomb. Who are you? Suki Miyazaki looked into the depths of the sword tomb. She did not leave, but chose to wait here. Just outside the sword tomb, while everyone was waiting. Yiguchen, who was in the deepest part of the sword tomb, was still concentrating on comprehending the sword principle. The 3 levels of sword principle were ordinary, peerless, and creation. The higher the level, the stronger the power. Of course, the difficulty of comprehending it was also multiplied. Otherwise, people who had comprehended the sword principle of the creation level would not be so rare. During this period of comprehension, Yiguchen finally completely pried open the key of the sword principle of all creation. At a certain moment, Yiguchen slowly opened his eyes, and a special wave of sword principle spread out. As the wave of sword principle spread out, there seemed to be countless sword chi gathering in the void around him. All things in the world as swords, gods, ghosts, demons, and evil as swords, the universe as swords, Yiguchen muttered to himself. He suddenly stood up and took a step forward. Wherever he passed, endless sword chi rose into the air. It was as if every blade of grass and every tree had turned into a sword. The true essence of the sword is not limited to the form. Mountains, rivers, grass, trees, the sun, the moon, and the stars can all be swords. At this moment, Yiguchen completely comprehended the sword principle of all creation. Yiguchen raised his hand. There was no sword in his hand, but in the surrounding void, endless sword chi burst out. It was as if it formed a torrent of sword chi that swept across the field. At this moment, Yiguchen's surroundings were filled with sword chi. Every blade of grass, tree, mountain, and stone had turned into sword chi, strangling the void, and the sound of swords could be heard in the sky. I have only just comprehended the sword principle of all creation, and it already has such power. If I completely comprehend it, how powerful will it be? What if it transforms into the sword principle? Feeling the terrifying power of the torrent of sword chi, Yiguchen could not help but exclaim. The power of the creation-level sword principle was indeed extraordinary. He was also very curious. After he transforms the sword principle of all creation into the sword principle, how powerful would the sword territory be? Next, Yiguchen used the advantage of the sword tomb to completely consolidate the sword principle of all creation. As for the transformation into the sword principle of all creation, it was not something that could be done in a few days. Just as Yiguchen was comprehending the sword principle of all creation. At Ling Qianhen's place of seclusion. Ling Qianhen, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the place 10,000 feet away. That wave of sword principle, could it be? There was surprise in Ling Qianhen's eyes. In another place, Jian Shisan also vaguely felt the wave. His voice was hoarse, and he muttered to himself, another Jian Jinghong, I hope, you won't be an obstacle. Under the ghost mask, Jian Shisan's dark and bottomless cold eyes had a deep meaning. However, those sword cultivators outside the sword tomb did not feel it. After completely comprehending the sword principle of all creation, Yiguchen did not choose to come out. After all, it was not easy for him to go deep into the sword tomb, and the effect was the best when he entered for the first time. It would be a pity if he left just like that. Next, Yiguchen sorted out his sword skills and martial arts. The 3 ultimate holy swords were completely mastered. The 3 moves could be combined at will, and Yiguchen had completely comprehended the combination of the 3 moves. It could be used as a killing move. There was also the 4th move of the 10,000 gods tribulation, Heaven's End. Yiguchen also began to comprehend it. Besides that, the most important thing was the ultimate sword domain. It was also the trump card that Yiguchen valued the most at the moment. However, as soon as he started cultivating, Yiguchen understood that the cultivation method of the ultimate sword domain was indeed extremely difficult. It seems that the ultimate sword domain should be a move unique to the sword tribe of Heaven Mountain. Yiguchen muttered to himself. As one of the 3 hidden forces in the South Horizon region, the sword tribe of Heaven Mountain was naturally very mysterious. It was understandable that they had such a cultivation method. Yiguchen still had not figured out his relationship with the sword tribe of Heaven Mountain. However, Yiguchen was determined to complete the cultivation of the ultimate sword domain. Now that he had the Azura, Edgeless, 5 elements, and Thunderbolt sword principles, the 4 supreme sword principles, he just happened to meet the cultivation requirements of the ultimate sword domain. In the following time, Yiguchin continued to comprehend in his heart. The 5 Academies Grand Competition finally arrived under everyone's attention. Chapter 999. The 5 Academies competition was a competition jointly organized by the 5 major academies, and it was also a rare grand event in the Sword Dynasty. Every time the 5 Academies competition, there would be many outstanding geniuses. Of course, there were also many geniuses who fell and lost their glory. For example, Ling Mo Shu, whose right arm was cut off by Hua Wuxiu and his spiritual residence was broken, was a living example. The 5 Academies competition this time had a different meaning. Because the timing of the competition was too sensitive. Now most people knew the situation in the Sword Dynasty. The aristocratic families and the individual cultivators were against each other. Tensei College, Sun Moon College, and Long River College were all controlled by the aristocratic families. Although Tianxian College was not weak, it could not compete with the 3 major academies. As for Sacred Cliff College, once the #1 academy in the Sword Dynasty, it was now in an awkward situation. Previously, Ling Mo Shu was crippled by Hua Wuxiu, which made Sacred Cliff College's reputation fall to the bottom. After the 5 Academies competition, it would be the battle for the Sword Master position. If Sacred Cliff College did not perform well in the 5 Academies competition, it would undoubtedly affect the battle for the Sword Master position. It would also shake the hearts of the individual cultivators' lords. Therefore, at this stage, the only way to make the individual cultivators' camp excited was to suppress Tensei College and other forces in the 5 Academies competition. In the past, this was almost unimaginable, and no one would have any hope. But this time was different, because there was Yiguchin, a natural-born saint. Everyone was curious about Yiguchin's real combat power. Could this natural-born saint help Sacred Cliff College win first place in the 5 Academies competition? It could be said that this suspense attracted all the sword cultivators in the Sword Dynasty. This time, the 5 Academies competition would be more grand than before. However, just as everyone was looking forward to Yiguchin's performance, there was a disturbance in Sacred Cliff College. Yiguchin left alone and did not disturb too many people. In addition to Ling Moyin, only Bei Xian Elder, the 5 Temple Masters, Great Elder Ime, and a few others knew. Moreover, Yiguchin had gone to the Sword Catacomb to comprehend his own trump card. Therefore, Bei Xian Elder and the others did not spread the news. During this time, many Sacred Cliff College disciples were puzzled and found that Yiguchin was missing. Where did senior brother Dugu go? Why can't I see him anywhere? In this 5 Academies competition, we can only rely on senior brother Dugu. Where is he? Many disciples of the Divine Cliff Academy were anxious and wanted to find traces of Yiguchin. Because the 5 Academies competition was getting closer and closer. Facing the emotions of many Sacred Cliff College's disciples, Bei Xian Elder and the others could only smile bitterly. They also knew that the mysterious genius who recently stepped into the Sword Tomb should be Yiguchin. But because of this, Bei Xian Elder and the others could not disclose in advance so that Hua Wuxiu and the others could be prepared. Therefore, there were a lot of rumors and slanders. Of course, everyone in Sacred Cliff College believed in Yiguchin. However, after the news spread, the aristocratic families took advantage of it. Ha, that Dugu Wubai disappeared. Could it be that he is afraid of Hua Wuxiu? I think so. What he said about cultivating in a mysterious place is nonsense. He must have a guilty conscience. Yes, if he cultivated for a year, Dugu Wubai might have the power to fight, but now, many rumors and slanders spread throughout the Sword Dynasty. Many aristocratic families were mocking Yiguchin, saying that he deliberately escaped because he was afraid. Dugu Wubai, will you really escape? On the Hua family's side, Hua Wuxiu was thinking. To be honest, he did not believe that Yiguchin was the kind of person who was afraid of fighting. But the news could not be false. If that's the case, then you really don't deserve the title of born saint. Hua Wuxiu shook his head slightly. As time went by, Yiguchin's figure was still missing in Sacred Cliff College. Even some of the Divine Cliff Academy's disciples felt nervous. While they were waiting, the day of the 5 Academies competition was finally approaching. Outside the Sword Tomb of Heavenly Sword Mountain, many of the warriors who had gathered there had already dispersed. Because most of them were rushing to the location of the 5 Academies competition, the imperial capital of the Sword Dynasty, Sword Emperor Ridge. He hasn't come out yet. Suki Miyazaki frowned slightly. She still wanted to know the true identity of the mysterious genius. But now, someone in the college had sent a message that the 5 Academies competition was about to begin, so she could not continue to wait here. What a pity, I really want to know who you are. Suki Miyazaki shook her head slightly and left with a group of Tianxian College disciples to prepare for the 5 Academies competition. Yin Ju and others from the Yin family could only leave because of the 5 Academies competition. Even Jian Shirsan left the Sword Tomb. Junior sister Zimo, the 5 Academies competition is about to begin. We have to go back to the college, Qin Lang said. With their strength, although they could not get a high ranking in the 5 Academies competition, it was good for them to train themselves. No. I have to wait for young master to come out. Zimo shook her head. Qin Lang had no choice but to wait with Zimo. 3 days later, outside the cave of Sacred Cliff College, many ships were floating in the void. Many disciples of Sacred Cliff College were ready to go to Sword Emperor Ridge. But if one looked carefully, one could see that every single Divine Cliff Academy's disciple's face was filled with disappointment and nervousness. During this period of time, Yigu Chen's disappearance caused all the disciples to feel uneasy. They were more afraid that the 5 Academies competition would repeat the same mistake. Only Jiang Yan had a sneer on his face. Xuanlian, Kong Kong, Ling Moyin, Han Lingxian, Yan Suk, and others were also ready to go. Where on earth did Brother Dugu go? Kong Kong asked, scratching his head in confusion. Young Master Dugu is not a person who runs away. Han Lingxian was very confident in Yiguchen. Kong Kong also nodded. He did not believe that Yiguchen would be afraid of Hua Wuxiu. But now the public opinion is very bad for Brother Dugu, Xuanlian said. Any public opinion will collapse by itself, Ling Moyin said. Because she knew that Yiguchen was the mysterious genius who stepped into the Sword Tomb. After she said that, everyone looked at her strangely. Ling Moyin really seemed to have changed her temperament. Only Han Lingxian, who had a pure heart, took a deep look at Ling Moyin. She understood how Ling Moyin felt. Although many of the Divine Cliff Academy's disciples were uneasy, Elder Bei Xian and the others were extremely calm and composed. They knew that Yiguchen would definitely not miss the 5 Academies competition. Little friend Dugu, I'm very curious. What kind of amazement will you bring to the world after coming out of the Sword Tomb? Bei Xian Elder said with a smile in his heart. Just as everyone was about to board the ship and set off, a black-clothed figure walked out of the Divine Cliff Academy with firm steps. When they saw this figure, all the noise in the surroundings quietened down. There was surprise, complexity, and sighing in their eyes. The person who appeared was Ling Mo Shu. Chapter 1000. Ling Mo Shu was once ranked 10th on the sword ranking list and a disciple of the Holy Emblem. He was once the pride of everyone in Sacred Cliff College. However, this pride was trampled on by Hua Wuxiu in the 5 Academies tournament. After that, Ling Mo Shu was unable to recover from this setback, which became a permanent pain in Sacred Cliff College. Tensei College often used this to ridicule Sacred Cliff College. However, the disciples of Sacred Cliff College had never blamed Ling Mo Shu. After all, he was also fighting for the honor of Sacred Cliff College. But now, why did Ling Mo Shu come out? His divine palace had been destroyed, and his cultivation had been crippled. This was a well-known fact. Therefore, no one deliberately probed Ling Mo Shu's aura. Even Bei Xian Elder and the others did not know that Ling Mo Shu had risen again under Yiguchen's guidance. I'm going to the 5 Academies tournament this time. Ling Mo Shu's tone was firm. His eyes were deep and flashed with a sharp light. His aura was restrained and steady. If one did not deliberately probe, they would not know the situation at all. Emoshu, you. Bei Xian elder hesitated slightly. At this time, Ling Moyin took a step forward and said, "Elders, let big brother go." Others did not know, but Ling Moyin knew. Her big brother was different from before. Of course, Ling Moyin was not sure whether Ling Emoshu had used the nirvana pill to reconstruct his spiritual abode. But no matter what, she believed in her brother. In the sky, Confuzi, the dean of the Holy Cliff College, was also there. He looked deeply at Ling Emoshu and waved his hand. Let him go. Since even Confuzi had spoken, Bei Xian elder and the others could only agree. The rest of the Sacred Cliff College disciples also looked at Ling Emoshu with complicated expressions. Ling Emoshu's expression remained the same as he stepped onto the ship. Brother Dugu, I, Ling Emoshu, will not let you down. Ling Emoshu murmured in his heart. After that, the people of Sacred Cliff College also boarded the ships and headed towards the Sword Monarch Ridge. Practically at the same time, the ships of the other 4 academies flew towards the Sword Monarch Ridge in unison. The Sword Monarch Ridge was the core territory of the Sword Dynasty, and the headquarters of the Sword Alliance was located there. The 5 academies competition was held here, which would naturally have a far-reaching impact. During these few days, the entire Sword Dynasty was in a state of upheaval as countless people gathered towards the Sword Monarch Ridge. The Sword Monarch City was located at the core of the Sword Monarch Ridge, and it was also the core imperial city of the Sword Dynasty. As far as the eye could see, the Sword Monarch City was majestic and vast, and it was bustling with people. Even though the area of the entire Sword Sovereign City was already very large, the various cultivators that flocked over still filled the entire imperial city to the brim. The location of the 5 academies competition was at the Sword Battle Square in the center of the Sword Monarch City. At this moment, the Sword Battle Square was already filled with a sea of people, and it held a total of 500,000 sword cultivators. On the Sword Battle Square, the arenas had already been set up, and they were quietly waiting for the disciples of the 5 academies to compete. There were still a few days before the competition began, but there were already many discussions around the square. Hey, do you guys think that Dugu Wubai will come? I think that should be a pretense. If Dugu Wubai really doesn't come, his reputation as a natural saint will dim. Many people were talking about Yiguchen, and there were a few warriors who were insightful and thought that Yiguchen would definitely come. That's not necessarily true. Talent and strength are not necessarily the same. If Dugu Wubai really loses to Hua Wuxiu, that would be a disgrace. There were also people who had different opinions. They thought that Dugu Wubai was still not a match for Hua Wuxiu, so he should avoid him for the time being. Just as everyone was talking about it. In the distant sky, many ships were sailing through the void towards them. The people from the 5 academies are finally here. The ships of the 5 academies arrived together. On the side of Tensei College, Hua Yuntao was still the leader. After all, in addition to his identity as a false saint of the Hua family, he was also the great elder of Tensei College. Beside him, Hua Wuxiu had one hand behind his back and the other hand was playing with a chess piece. He looked very leisurely and indifferent. Only the disciples of the 5 academies could participate in the 5 academies tournament. The first on the sword list, Zi, and the second on the sword list, Jian Jinghong, were not disciples of the academies. The 13 swordsmen could not participate in the 5 academies tournament either. Therefore, Hua Wuxiu, who was third on the sword list, was naturally the most promising person to win the 5 academies tournament. In the past, Hua Wuxiu had indeed won the 5 academies tournament. Therefore, Hua Wuxiu did not feel the slightest pressure in the 5 academies tournament. Of course, there was one more suspense in this 5 academies tournament, which was Yiguchen, who had passed through the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing and won the title of Natural Saint. On the ship of Tensei College, there was a woman with a cold face. She was Yushuang Yan. She had also joined Tensei College. In addition, Hua Xingjie was also there. On the other side, the leader of Sun Moon College was Shengguan Bo, the head of the Shengguan family. He had also appeared on Mount St. Crossing last time. He had another identity, the dean of Sun Moon College. On the side of Sun Moon College, Jiang Fengmian, Shengguan Jingshen, and Shengguan Yan were there. On the side of Long River College, the leader was the first elder of the Yin family, Yin Lengshan, who was also the first elder of Long River College. Yin Zhu, Yin Lin, and Yin Su, who had appeared in the Sword Tomb, were also there. In addition, Yin Wufeng, Ouyang Fengyun, and Ouyang Tianji were also there. On the side of Tianxian College, Wu Hongyan was naturally the leader. Mu Xingzu, Ying Lang, and Suki Miyazaki, who had hurried over from the Sword Tomb, were also there. Of course, Sacred Cliff College was the most eye-catching. After all, Sacred Cliff College had produced a natural saint this time. More than 500,000 warriors in the entire Sword Battle Square focused their attention on the ship of Sacred Cliff College, hoping to find the figure that had attracted everyone's attention. But there was no one. On the side of Sacred Cliff College, Confuzi was the leader. Among those disciples, Xuanlian, who ranked 4th on the sword ranking, Kong Kong, Han Lingxian, Ling Moyin, and Ling Mo Shu were all there. Only Yi Guqin was missing. That Dugu Wubai really didn't come. It seems that Dugu Wubai is really afraid of the battle. I thought it was just some rumor spread by the aristocratic families. When they saw that Yi Guqin's figure did not appear on the ship of Sacred Cliff College, the entire Sword Battle Square was in an uproar. This was because many of the warriors who came to watch the battle were from the Lone Cultivator camp. Naturally, they would choose to support Yi Guqin. However, Yi Guqin really did not appear, which surprised and disappointed the Lone Cultivator warriors. Why is this happening? Dugu Wubai is a natural saint who passed the 20th level of Mount St. Crossing. Yes, even if he might lose, he can't not show up. Many of the Lone Cultivator warriors were extremely disappointed. They had great expectations for Yi Guqin. They had hoped that Yi Guqin could contend with Hua Wuxiu and increase the power of the Lone Cultivator camp. However, it was all in vain now. Chapter 1001. Dugu Wubai really didn't come. On the ship of Tensei College, Hua Wuxiu shook his head slightly and sighed. Looking at his appearance, there was actually a bit of pity. Dugu Wubai must have a guilty conscience. How can he be compared with you, brother Hua? Yu Shuangyan said. Facing Hua Wuxiu, the indifference on her face disappeared and was replaced by worship and admiration. Yes, that Dugu Wubai is just a pewter spearhead. Hua Xingjie also snorted coldly. However, he subconsciously neglected the fact that he had once suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of such a pewter spearhead. That little bastard has a good idea. In this way, you can't cripple him. Hua Yuntao lowered his voice and seemed a little angry and disappointed. He also wanted Hua Wuxiu to completely cripple Yi Guqin in the 5 academies competition. Now that Yi Guqin avoided the battle, they had no choice. I always feel that this Dugu Wubai is not a person who avoids the battle. He will definitely come. Hua Wuxiu's eyes flashed a dark light and he thought. On the side of Sun Moon College, Shengguan Jingshan sneered and said, "Didn't Dugu Wubai say that he would eliminate me? Why is he not here now? Don't tell me you're really scared." Shengguan Yan's pretty eyes rolled around. She also did not believe that Yi Guqin would avoid the battle. Dugu Wubai should not be that kind of character. He will definitely come. Jiang Fengmian judged. On the side of Long River College, Ouyang Fengyun faintly shook his head and said, "It seems that there is no chance to fight with him. Before in the ancient Chaos Wasteland, there was no winner between us. Dugu Wubai is very arrogant, but I'm afraid that he is not your opponent." Ouyang Tianji sneered. He hated Yi Guqin to the core. He was happy to see Yi Guqin's reputation ruined. On the side of Tianxian College, Mu Xingzu had absolute confidence in Yi Guqin. Suki Miyazaki was slightly dazed and was still thinking about who the mysterious genius in the Sword Tomb was. At present, the 5 academies had all arrived, and the atmosphere instantly reached its peak. Ha, Confusi, it seems that our Tensei college will take first place in the 5 academies competition this time. Hua Yuntao said with a fake smile. Oh, you are so confident. Confusi stroked his snow-white beard and looked very calm. Are you still counting on Duga Wubai? But where is he now? Hua Yuntao gave tit for tat. You don't have to worry about this. Confusi said lightly. Feeling the strong smell of gunpowder between the words, the entire sword battle square was in an uproar. There were still a few days before the 5 academies competition officially began. These few days were the time to sign up for the competition. After all, not all the disciples of the academies would participate. Some people just came to watch the battle. After the registration was over, those who did not sign up would not be able to participate in the 5 academies competition. Of course, there was a condition that could allow the disciples who did not sign up to participate in the competition. However, no one used that condition at all. Hey, look, that's Ling Mo Shu. Did he sign up too? Some warriors noticed Ling Mo Shu. Senior brother Ling. Even some of the disciples of Sacred Cliff College were a little stunned. They thought that Ling Mo Shu was just here to watch the battle. Who would have thought that he would sign up for the competition? Confusi looked deeply at Ling Mo Shu and revealed a trace of satisfaction in his eyes. Oh, is he asking to be humiliated? When they saw Ling Mo Shu sign up, almost all the disciples of Tensei College showed a look of disdain. Hua Wuxiu did not care at all. In his eyes, Ling Mo Shu did not exist at all. In his opinion, there was no need to worry about a loser. Time passed day by day, and the registration date was also over. In the end, the crowd did not see Iguchin. The registration time is over. There is no hope at all. Even if Duga Wubai comes now, he can't participate in the 5 academies competition. Many people sighed. Most of them were warriors from the Free Cultivator camp. As for the warriors from the 5 fake saint families, they were all mocking and ridiculing. Even on the Divine Cliff Academy's side, many disciples were somewhat dejected and dispirited. Is there no other way? Ling Moyin bit her lip. She did not think that Yi Guqin would avoid the battle. It was very likely that he was concentrating on cultivation and forgot about the time. No, there is another way. Xuanlian said. You mean? Ling Moyin seemed to have thought of something and her delicate body trembled. However, she immediately shook her head and said, that's impossible. That condition is too difficult. Oh, how do you know that Brother Dugu won't do that? He just likes to surprise people. Xuanlian smiled faintly. Ling Moyin was slightly stunned. That condition had never appeared in the 5 academies competition in the past. Because no one would choose to participate in the 5 academies competition in that way. That was looking for trouble. As time passed, the 5 academies competition officially began after the registration was completed. At the beginning of the 5 academies competition, 2 flying boats appeared in the sky. Many geniuses with extraordinary auras were standing on the boats. They wore masks on their faces and had extraordinary auras. The Sword Sons are here. Some people shouted. In fact, no one was surprised by the arrival of these Sword Sons. After all, those who stood out in the 5 academies competition had the strength to compete for the position of Sword Son. It was normal for these Sword Sons to come in advance to check out the situation. Standing on these 2 flying boats were the Sword Sons from the Free Cultivator camp and the Aristocratic Family camp. On one of the flying boats, Kenpo was among them. In addition, Jian Wu, 7th Swordsman, and Jian Shi, who had appeared before, were also there. In addition, there were 2 more people. One was 10th Swordsman, who was also a Sword Son from the Free Cultivator camp. The other person was dressed in a grey robe with a blood-red long sword on his back and a ghost mask on his face. It was Jian Shisan, who had a brief fight with Yi Guqin in the Sword Tomb. He was also the strongest Sword Son from the Free Cultivator camp. Little 13, I heard that there's a mysterious prodigy in the Sword Catacomb who has stepped into the Sword Catacomb. Sword 11 asked. Yes. Jian Shisan indifferently responded and did not say much. Jian Shi and others seemed to be used to Jian Shisan's alienation and indifference, so they did not mind. On the contrary, Jian Wu shook his head and said, Dugu Wubai did not come to participate in the competition. It seems that the champion of the 5 academies competition will be Hua Wuxiu. In fact, the sword sons from the Free Cultivator camp did not want Hua Wuxiu to win the championship. Jian Shisan's eyes under the ghost mask flickered secretly. Only he had a faint suspicion that the mysterious genius in the sword tomb was probably Yi Guqin. But he did not say it out loud. On the other side, the sword sons from the aristocratic family camp were also discussing. It seems that the champion this time is undoubtedly Hua Wuxiu. A sword son in a blue shirt smiled faintly. He was sword too. Among the sword sons from the aristocratic family camp, his strength was second only to Jinkui. But this time, Jinkui did not come. It seems that the battle for the position of sword son this time will be a battle between the aristocratic families. Sword 3 laughed. He was a young man with an iron mask, with a strong back and a strong waist. In short, whether it was these sword sons or the more than 500,000 warriors present, they all thought that the champion of the 5 academies competition was almost decided. And it was also at this moment that there was finally a trace of movement in the sword tomb that had been silent for a long time. Chapter 1002. Sky Sword Ridge, Sword Tomb. Outside the sword tomb, there were still some sword cultivators gathered, but there were much fewer of them than before. This was because most of them had gone to the Sword Monarch City in the Sword Monarch Ridge to observe the 5 academies tournament. Qin Lang and Zimo were still waiting at the edge of the sword tomb. He can actually cultivate in the sword tomb for so long. Qin Lang's eyes were still filled with shock. Even if an ordinary person could withstand the pressure of the sword tomb, they could not cultivate in the sword tomb for a long time. Therefore, after cultivating for a period of time, they would need to come out and enter again. However, Yi Guqin had been in the sword tomb for so many days, but he had yet to come out. What was even more shocking was that Yi Guqin was cultivating in the sword tomb, which was also the place where the pressure of the sword qi was the strongest. To be able to stay in such a place for such a long time was absolutely shocking. That young master is really extraordinary. I really want to know who he is. Zimo's eyes were filled with curiosity and yearning. While everyone was waiting patiently, the storm of sword qi that swept through the heavens and the earth in the sword tomb suddenly became chaotic. The entire sword tomb began to tremble. What's going on? The sword cultivators who were still cultivating in the sword tomb were all startled like birds startled by the twang of a bow. What's going on? Zimo, Qin Lang, and the others also noticed it. The entire sword tomb seemed to be trembling slightly, as if a great calamity was about to appear. Look, those swords. Suddenly, someone's eyes widened as he shouted in shock. Zimo and the others looked over and saw that the ancient swords in the sword tomb had begun to tremble slightly. At first, only a few of them were trembling, but then, as if they were attracted by an infection, there was a chain reaction. Countless ancient swords began to buzz and tremble. The center of the fluctuation is coming from the depths of the sword tomb. Some sword cultivators sensed it, and their eyes were filled with disbelief as they stared at the depths of the sword tomb. This strange phenomenon had never happened in the sword tomb before. It's that young master. Zimo's eyes were filled with surprise as she stared at the sword tomb. Inside the sword tomb, even Ling Qianhen could feel the changes in the sword tomb. His gaze unconsciously turned to the core of the sword tomb. Is this really something he can do? Even a false saint like Ling Qianhen had a hint of surprise in his eyes. He had been cultivating in the sword tomb for so long, but this was the first time he had seen such an abnormality. At this moment, in the depths of the sword vault, around Yi Guqin, countless ancient swords vibrated violently, as if resonating with Yi Guqin. Every ancient sword drew closer to Yi Guqin. It was as if Yi Guqin was the master of the sword. At a certain moment, Yi Guqin suddenly opened his eyes. A powerful aura surged from his body. For so many days, Yi Guqin had been enduring the pressure of the sword qi. His genuine Qi realm had also broken through to Tiandi Lingqiao because of this. But this was not the most important thing. Yi Guqin raised his left hand, and a powerful five-colored sword light rotated endlessly, and the five elements sword realm spread out. Five elements sword realm. Then, he raised his right hand, and endless sword light poured out, turning into a thunderbolt light ball, releasing tens of thousands of thunderbolts, and turning the surrounding space into a wild thunder prison. Heaven's Punishment Thunder Prison. Yi Guqin displayed two sword principal domains at the same time. For a moment, the entire core of the sword tomb changed color. The five-colored sword light swept across the world. The wild thunder prison swept in all directions. Fusion, Ultimate Sword Realm. Yi Guqin shouted coldly, and his ultimate sea of qi spun wildly. Terrifying genuine qi burst out, activating the two sword principal domains. This was not as simple as activating two sword principal domains at the same time, but fusing them into one. Rumble. The five elements sword realm and Heaven's Punishment Thunder Prison began to collide and fuse. Waves of terrifying destructive waves swept in all directions. Deep ravines were plowed in the ground by the waves of sword qi. The surrounding hills exploded, and dust filled the sky. Rumble. Finally, the two sword principal domains fused and overlapped. The power that erupted in an instant was like a nuclear bomb. Rumble. The ground was torn apart, and countless ancient swords vibrated violently. Yi Guqin stood in the ultimate sword realm, like the emperor of 10,000 swords. What a powerful force! Even with Yi Guqin's temperament, he could not help but take a deep breath. This was only the fusion of two sword principal domains. Strictly speaking, it was not the ultimate sword realm. Even the fusion of three sword domains was only at the entry level. The fusion of four sword domains was the true ultimate sword realm. However, Yi Guqin also realized that when he performed the fusion of two sword domains, the consumption of genuine qi was huge. It was comparable to performing the third move of 10,000 gods' tribulation, demonic Buddha's tears. At this moment, the ultimate sword realm that was formed by the fusion of two sword domains suddenly became unstable, and the sword qi scattered. Yi Guqin immediately dispersed it. As expected of the cultivation method of the Sky Mountain Sword Tribe. It is indeed difficult, but its power is also worthy of the name ultimate. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. Although the ultimate sword realm was difficult to cultivate, its power was proportional to its difficulty. Even with the help of the sword tomb, he could only fuse the two sword domains together, and it was not stable. However, the cultivation of the ultimate sword realm could not be rushed. Even the power of the dual sword domain was enough to satisfy Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's trip to the sword tomb could be said to be a successful one. He had completely comprehended the lightning sword principle. He had also comprehended the sword essence of all creation. The ultimate sword domain had fused to form the dual sword domain. He had slightly comprehended the fourth move of 10,000 gods' tribulation, Heaven's End. He had completely mastered the three ultimate holy swords and could perform them at will. His cultivation level had broken through to stage 7. Yi Guqin's strength had improved in all aspects. It should be time for the 5 Academies tournament. Yi Guqin looked into the distance. His opponents this time were Hua Wuxiu, Jiang Fengmian, and Shengguan Jingshen. None of them were easy to deal with. However, Yi Guqin was not afraid at all. Since I have to face so many opponents, then. Yi Guqin paused for a moment, and then said, I will give you an unforgettable surprise. Yi Guqin's body was straight, and the sword qi here could no longer suppress him. Yi Guqin raised his right hand, put his index finger and middle finger together, and pointed at his forehead. A wave of terrifying soul power spread out. This soul power spread out in all directions with Yi Guqin as the center. Wherever it passed, the ancient swords stuck in the ground trembled even more violently. Heart control 108,000 swords, Dugu 9 swords, heart sword style. Yi Guqin urged his soul power to control many ancient swords, flying towards him and circling around him. 1 sword, 10 swords, 100 swords, 5,000 swords, not enough. Yiguchen's eyes were cold. A strange sword essence wave spread out from his body again. Heaven and earth, sun, moon, and stars, all creation swords, listen to my command. Yiguchen shouted and displayed the sword essence of all creation again. It was known that this was the creation-level sword essence. As soon as it was displayed, the entire sword tomb roared again, causing violent tremors. What is going on? Inside and outside the sword tomb, all the sword cultivators were shocked speechless. Zimo, Qin Lang, and the others were shocked. Look, the swords in the sword tomb. Some of the sword cultivators were stunned as they pointed their fingers. Everyone saw that in the sword tomb, countless ancient swords rose from the ground and flew towards the core of the sword tomb. In the end, what happened? Zimo's heart was filled with shock. At this moment, within the sword tomb, countless ancient swords were circling around Yiguchen. Yiguchen was like the ruler of 10,000 swords, the king of all heavens. Condense. Yiguchen pointed his finger at the sky, and the sword essence of all creation turned into a torrent of sword chi, rushing towards the sky. The surrounding 10,000 swords returned to him, and in the end, they condensed into a dragon in the sky. That's right. A dragon sword that was completely formed by ancient swords. This dragon sword circled the sky, letting out a roar that shook the sky. Tens of thousands of ancient swords condensed into a dragon, soaring up 90,000 miles. This was the heart sword style's method of controlling swords with one's heart, and combined with the sword essence of all creation to form a spectacle. Yiguchen took a step forward, and his figure stepped towards the sky. The dragon sword lowered its head, as if it was welcoming Yiguchen. Yiguchen stepped onto the dragon's head, and stood with his hands behind his back. Let's go to the Sword Monarch Ridge. Yiguchen smiled freely, and his black hair fluttered in the wind. He wanted to ride the dragon up, shake the 9 heavens, and transform the wind and clouds into a dragon. Chapter 1003. Outside the sword catacomb, everyone was stunned. This was because they had seen a scene that they would never forget in their lives. In the depths of the sword catacomb, above the 9 heavens, layers of clouds were rolling. Countless ancient swords circled in the void and finally condensed into a dragon sword. The dragon sword roared to the heavens and the earth, dispersing the clouds in all directions. Then, a figure stepped on the void and stepped on the top of the dragon sword. It was as if the divine king had arrived and rode the dragon away. It's that mysterious genius. Gosh, what kind of technique is that? Outside the sword catacomb, all the sword cultivators who were still there were dumbfounded and had goosebumps all over their bodies. Thousands of ancient swords condensed into a dragon and soared 90,000 miles into the sky. What a magnificent and majestic sight. It's the young lord, how strong is he? Zimo's pretty face was completely sluggish, the scene in front of her was really beyond her imagination. That direction is the Sword Monarch Ridge. Qin Lang was also shocked beyond words. He also noticed the direction in which the dragon's sword left. The Sword Monarch Ridge is where the 5 Academies tournament is held. Could it be that the mysterious genius is going to participate in the 5 Academies tournament? Let's go and see. Everyone around the sword catacomb began to move and followed the direction in which Yiguchen left. Let's go too. Zimo was also impatient and moved directly. Qin Lang followed closely behind. The entire sword catacomb was almost empty. Everyone followed the direction in which Yiguchen left. Inside the sword catacomb, on a snowy hill, Ling Qianhen looked in the direction in which Yiguchen left and sighed. Creation-level sword essence. Yiguchen, you are indeed a peerless genius of the sword Dao. I am curious to see how you will perform in the 5 Academies tournament. Even with Ling Qianhen's character, he still let out such a sigh. It could be seen how big of a shock Yiguchen brought to him. Just as Yiguchen was driving the dragon sword towards the Sword Monarch Ridge. In the Sword Emperor city of the Sword Emperor Ridge, the 5 Academies grand competition had finally begun. After the disciples of the 5 great academies had registered, they would immediately draw lots for the competition. In the end, when there were only 10 people left, they would be divided into 5 camps and fight for their respective academies. Very quickly, the fiery arena battle had completely begun. The surrounding crowd also started to discuss. This time, without Dugu Wubai, Sacred Cliff College only has one Xuanlian left who has a chance to enter the top 10. Yeah, Sacred Cliff College is probably going to be at the bottom again. Many warriors shook their heads. They were not optimistic about Sacred Cliff College. Even though there was a Xuanlian, who was ranked 4th on the sword ranking, Sacred Cliff College still couldn't reverse the situation. He really didn't show up. Dugu Wubai, you've disappointed me. Hua Wuxiu sighed softly. At this moment, a referee's voice attracted the attention of all the warriors. This battle, Ling Emoshu of Sacred Cliff College vs Ouyang Tianji of Long River College. As soon as the referee finished speaking, a stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. That Ling Emoshu is really going to fight? TSK, this is going to be interesting. That Ouyang Tianji left Sacred Cliff College and returned to Long River College. He actually met his old boss. Sigh, Ling Emoshu is really overestimating himself. He's just a cripple. He should just watch the battle. Why is he joining in the fun? Some warriors shook their heads. Not to mention these outsiders, even the disciples of Sacred Cliff College were not clear about Ling Emoshu's situation and were worried about him. Ling Moyin bit her red lips and looked a little nervous. She knew that Ling Emoshu was not the same as before, but she didn't know how strong Ling Emoshu was now. Ling Emoshu's expression was extremely calm as he felt the gazes of the people around him. Step by step, he slowly stepped onto the arena. Opposite him, Ouyang Tianji also walked up. After Mount Saint crossing, Ouyang Tianji returned to Long River College. Long River College was originally jointly controlled by the Yin family and the Ouyang family. Sun Moon College was controlled by the Jiang family and the Shengguan family. Tensei College was controlled by the Hua family. At this moment, seeing Ling Mashu come up, Ouyang Tianji had a disdainful smile at the corner of his mouth. He said jokingly, "Senior brother Ling, you say, why are you, a cripple, joining in the fun?" Obviously, Ouyang Tianji, like the others, despised Ling Emoshu very much. Even if Ling Emoshu was once a divine mansion heavenly talent and a disciple of the Holy Emblem. But as long as he was defeated, his reputation would fall to the bottom. Not to mention that Hua Wuxiu had cut off his right arm and destroyed his divine mansion. "I have nothing to say to a traitor," Ling Emoshu said in a cold tone. "Yo, Ling Emoshu, who gave you the confidence to participate in the 5 academies tournament? Be careful, or I'll cripple your other hand." Ouyang Tianji heard this and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. The 5 academies tournament stipulated that no one was allowed to kill. But if one acted quickly, one could directly cripple the opponent before the opponent had time to shout out and admit defeat. After Brother Dugu's guidance, I'm no longer who I used to be. Ling Emoshu's eyes flashed coldly. What, Dugu Wubai? Hearing Ling Emoshu's words, there was a burst of uproar around the square. They didn't expect that it was Dugu Wubai who asked Ling Emoshu to participate in the tournament. Ha, I'm dying of laughter. Dugu Wubai didn't dare to come out, so he pushed you, a cripple, to die. It's really interesting. Ouyang Tianji couldn't help laughing. Can we start? Ling Emoshu turned to the referee. Yes. The referee nodded slightly. Whoosh. Just as the referee's voice fell, Ling Emoshu turned his left hand and a long black sword fell into his hand. Sky Sword Technique, Sky Blue Water. Ling Emoshu's body pulled out a residual shadow, and the sword vibrated out. He was like a swordsman, his black hair fluttering, and his sword swept out like a wave, extremely powerful. What's going on? Ouyang Tianji screamed, his eyes full of extreme disbelief. The oppressive sword chi made him feel suffocated. How could it be? Everyone's eyes were fixed on the 2 people in the arena. Even Hua Wuxiu, who didn't pay attention before, frowned slightly and looked over. Clang! In a hurry, Ouyang Tianji hurriedly blocked with his sword, but he was shocked back. His hand was numb, and his chest was stuffy, and he couldn't help but spit out a small mouthful of blood. One wrong step, and all the steps were wrong. Ling Emoshu's sword power didn't decrease, and he continued to oppress Ouyang Tianji. Damn it, how is it possible? Aren't you a cripple? Ouyang Tianji roared crazily. Ling Emoshu's expression was indifferent. He held the sword in his left hand, and he was incomparably skilled. He perfectly countered Ouyang Tianji, who was holding the sword in his right hand. Sky Sword Technique, Sky Sword Ocean. Ling Emoshu's aura fluctuated, and what he emitted was the aura of a divine dwelling expert. The tip of his sword materialized, and the sword chi seemed to have turned into a tidal wave as it swept towards Ouyang Tianji. Impossible! Ouyang Tianji tried his best to resist, but the terrifying sword ocean directly drowned him. Pfft! Amidst the chaotic sword chi, the sound of vomiting blood could be heard. Ouyang Tianji's figure was ruthlessly blasted out of the arena. His clothes were torn, and countless sword wounds appeared. He was on the verge of death, like a dead dog. On the other side, Ling Emoshu held the sword in his left hand. He raised the blood-stained sword and pointed it at Tensei College's Hua Wuxiu. There's no need for Brother Dugu to make a move. I, Ling Emoshu, will fight with you. As soon as his words fell, the weather changed. Chapter 1004. There were more than 500,000 people in the entire square. But at this moment, no one made a sound. Everyone held their breaths, and their eyes were frozen with shock. No one could have imagined that the divine dwelling Heaven Pride and Holy Emblem disciple, whose cultivation had been crippled by Hua Wuxiu, would rise again. What was even more unexpected was that Ling Emoshu would have the courage to challenge Hua Wuxiu once again. Senior Brother Ling. All the Sacred Cliff College disciples burst into cheers after being stunned for a moment. There were even tears in their eyes. Back then, Ling Emoshu had fought with Hua Wuxiu for the dignity of Sacred Cliff College and suffered a crushing defeat. That battle could be said to be a deep wound that fiercely cut into the hearts of all the Sacred Cliff College disciples. After that, Ling Emoshu was unable to recover from the setback, which made many disciples feel sad. Ling Moyin's temperament also changed greatly because of this. But now, the high-spirited Ling Emoshu who pointed his sword at the world had appeared again. He had easily defeated Ouyang Tianji, who was at the divine dwelling stage, with 2 or 3 strikes. Like a blazing sun, he had risen again. Big brother! Ling Moyin couldn't help crying tears of joy. The indomitable big brother in her heart had returned once again. Moreover, Ling Moyin didn't forget that the person who saved Ling Emoshu from the abyss was Yiguchen. Dugu Wubai, I owe you too much. Ling Moyin muttered in her heart. Everyone present looked at Ling Emoshu in surprise. Some of them even thought of Ling Emoshu's words. He had been reminded by Dugu Wubai. Could it be that the reason why Dugu Wubai didn't come is because he reminded Ling Emoshu to come and wash away the shame? But how did Dugu Wubai make Ling Emoshu rise again? Many people were puzzled. Not only was he curious about Ling Emoshu, but he was also curious about Yiguchen. Do you think you're qualified to fight me? Hua Wuxiu put his hands behind his back and stared coldly at Ling Emoshu. Instead of Yiguchen coming out to fight with him, what was the meaning of letting Ling Emoshu fight? Even if he had defeated Ling Emoshu, he had only defeated a loser. If news of this got out, Hua Wuxiu would not benefit at all. What Hua Wuxiu needed was to defeat the innate saint, Yiguchen. After 3 days of separation, I have a whole new level of respect for you. Hua Wuxiu, we will eventually meet again. Ling Emoshu's eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Ling Emoshu's move could be said to have shocked everyone. Some people were even curious about Yiguchen, who had not yet appeared. It's a pity that even if Dugu Wubai comes, he can only be a spectator. I'm really curious about how strong this Dugu Wubai, who can make Ling Emoshu rise again, is. Ling Emoshu's performance made everyone more curious about Iguchin. Next, the arena battle continued. However, because of Ling Emoshu's performance, the disciples of Sacred Cliff College were slightly elated, and they were not as depressed as before. The only thing that everyone felt was a pity was that Iguchin did not come. It could be imagined that after the 5 academies competition ended, there would be more rumors circulating throughout the Sword Dynasty. In the following arena battles, there were also some disciples of Sacred Cliff College who performed well. For example, Kong Kong, Ling Moyin, Han Lingxian, and so on, all achieved good results. Of course, there was still a certain distance to enter the top 10. In the end, nearly 2 days later, the top 10 candidates were finally chosen. 2 people from Sacred Cliff College were selected, Xuanlian and Ling Emoshu. However, the disciples of Sacred Cliff College were still not happy, because if Iguchin was there might be 3 people selected. 3 people in the top 10 of the 5 academies competition were selected, which was definitely a grand occasion that Sacred Cliff College had never experienced before. After the top 10 of the 5 academies competition were chosen, it was time to fight for their respective academies. Then, there was another round of battles, and they began to slowly choose the strongest one. Among them, Ling Emoshu's performance was really amazing. The next battle, Ling Emoshu of Sacred Cliff College vs Hua Wuxiu of Tensei College, a referee said loudly. When the voice came out, the whole noisy sword fighting square was dead silent for a moment. Should it be a coincidence? Or was it God's will? Well, I've been waiting for this moment. In Ling Emoshu's eyes, there was not a trace of fear. Where he fell, he would get up. Even if his opponent was the extremely powerful Hua Wuxiu, Ling Emoshu did not intend to retreat in his heart. On the other side, Hua Wuxiu frowned slightly, obviously not wanting to fight with the loser again. But rules were rules. Then, the 2 also stepped on the arena at the same time. At this moment, the hearts of all the disciples of Sacred Cliff College were in their mouths. Ling Moyin was so nervous that she almost stopped breathing. The nightmarish scene of the past was still vivid in her mind. Would history repeat itself today? Although Ling Emoshu has reconstructed his spiritual abode, it's not good for him to go up against Hua Wuxiu. Jian Wu shook his head lightly. Indeed, Ling Emoshu is missing his right arm after all. Although I don't know where he learned to use his left hand skillfully, he is still inferior to Hua Wuxiu. Jian Shi also sighed slightly. In the arena, Ling Emoshu held the sword in his left hand, his black hair fluttering. His gaze was fixed on Hua Wuxiu, incomparably calm. Hua Wuxiu's face was still indifferent, and he said, Ling Emoshu, although I don't know how you can reconstruct your spiritual abode, a loser is a loser. How will you know if you don't try? If you want to fight Brother Dugu, you'll have to beat me first. Ling Emoshu did not say anything else, and directly drew his sword. The blade of the sword cut through the air, stabbing toward Hua Wuxiu. Hua Wuxiu shook his head lightly, and also drew out a shining divine weapon, and also held the sword in his left hand. It was his quasi-tribulation divine weapon, the light sword of the light and shadow dual swords. By the way, Hua Wuxiu is also good at using dual swords, and his mastery of the sword in his left hand is not inferior to that of his right hand. This time, Ling Emoshu is in danger. Some warriors could not help but say. Ling Emoshu's left-handed sword could indeed restrain some sword cultivators who only knew how to use their right hand. But against Hua Wuxiu, who was also good at using his left hand, Ling Emoshu had no advantage. This kind of battle was extremely disadvantageous for Ling Emoshu. Clang! In the arena, the 2 of them fought. Ling Emoshu took the initiative to attack, and the blade of his sword was extremely aggressive, stabbing toward Hua Wuxiu, as if he wanted to pour out all the decadence and humiliation he had suffered over the years. On the other hand, Hua Wuxiu's expression was extremely calm and indifferent. With his right hand behind his back and the light sword in his left hand, he blocked all of Ling Emoshu's attacks. Looking at the situation, many elders of Sacred Cliff College frowned slightly. Ling Emoshu's performance was already amazing enough. After being decadent for so long, his first attack was still so powerful. But Hua Wuxiu was even more calm. Sword force flow. Seeing that he could not break through Hua Wuxiu's defense, Ling Emoshu directly burst out with his strongest move. The transformed flawless spiritual abode in his body erupted with a terrifying amount of vital energy, which was transmitted to the blade. The vigorous sword light swept out like a torrent. Interesting. Hua Wuxiu's lips curled into a faint smile. Sword of light, daybreak. Hua Wuxiu added the power of Komyo Kendo, and the blade of his sword suddenly trembled and swept out, colliding with Ling Emoshu's sword force. A loud clang was heard, and it shattered everyone's eardrums. Ling Emoshu's figure was directly pushed back to the edge of the arena. In an instant, Hua Wuxiu flipped his right hand, and a shadow sword that was as dark as the night appeared in his hand. He swept the sword toward Ling Emoshu. Sword of Shadow, Shadow Blade. The ink-black sword light turned into a sharp blade and swept toward Ling Emoshu's left arm. Hua Wuxiu's move was not to take Ling Emoshu's life, but to cut off his left arm as well. His thoughts were truly vicious. If Ling Emoshu lost his left arm, it would definitely be more painful than death. Seeing this, everyone could not help but hold their breaths. Oh no! Everyone from Sacred Cliff College turned pale. At this moment, a figure flashed onto the arena at an extremely fast speed and stood in front of Ling Emoshu. Shaoyin. Ling Moshu was shocked. His eyes were bloodshot, and his eyes were about to crack. The person who flashed onto the arena was Ling Moyin. Big brother, Shaoyin can't let you lose your left arm. Ling Moyin smiled sadly. The sword of shadow was about to hit Ling Moyin's delicate body. Ling Moyin closed her eyes and gritted her teeth. Even if she died, she did not want to see her brother suffer. At this moment, all the noise in the world seemed to have been removed. Clang! An ear-piercing sound of metal clashing suddenly rang out beside Ling Moyin's ears. Ling Moyin's heart trembled, and she opened her beautiful eyes in disbelief. A supreme-grade divine weapon with mystical patterns broke through the Sword of Shadow's attack and stabbed into the ground, letting out a continuous sword hum. Ling Moyin's delicate body suddenly froze, and she looked into the distance. Chapter 1005. At this moment, the entire bustling sword battle square was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Everyone was still in a daze. No one had expected Ling Moyin to rush into the arena. Just when everyone thought that Ling Moyin would be killed by the sword, Li Mu's expression changed. A sword broke apart Hua Wuxiu's sword move and saved Ling Moyin. At this moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on where the sword had come from. The sound of metal clashing could be faintly heard from the heavenly sword in the distance. The endless clouds seemed to be trembling. Roar! Suddenly, a long roar like a dragon's roar shook the heavens and the earth. The shadow of a dragon appeared in the misty cloud sword, accompanied by endless sword chi. It was like a mighty river of divine swords, breaking through thousands of clouds. What is that, a dragon? In the entire square, the faces of more than 500,000 warriors were frozen with unprecedented shock. No. No, that's not a dragon, it's a sword. A venerable swordsman narrowed his eyes and shouted involuntarily. Following this sentence, the entire square was in an uproar. That dragon's shadow was actually formed by swords. Look, there's a person standing on the dragon's head. Some sharp-eyed warriors immediately pointed. The dragon's sword appeared in the sky. A cloaked figure stood on the head of the dragon's sword with his hands behind his back. He was like the divine king of swords, looking down on all living beings. This scene was not only seen in the sword battle square, but also in the entire sword sovereign city. As long as all the warriors raised their heads, they could see the dragon's sword with sword chi soaring into the sky. This person actually saved Ling Moyin. At this moment, everyone realized that it was this person who had attacked and saved Ling Moyin from Hua Wuxiu's hands. Ling Moyin's delicate body trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. She already knew who this person was. He still came. On the other side, Hua Wuxiu raised his head and frowned as he stared at the figure standing on top of the dragon's sword. Sensing the sword intent contained within the dragon's sword, Hua Wuxiu's expression became even more solemn. Everyone present was shocked speechless by the sudden appearance of this figure. This was especially true for the dragon's sword. Many sword cultivators could sense the terrifying sword intent hidden within it. "It's you actually came here." Yin Ju stepped out from the crowd and coldly looked at the figure in the sky. Yin Lin and Yin Su also exclaimed in shock, "How is this possible? Why are you here?" Some warriors who had stayed in the sword tomb also suddenly shouted, "It's him. He's the mysterious genius who stepped into the sword tomb." "What? It's actually him. It turns out that he's the mysterious genius. He's really extraordinary. If we're talking about the most famous geniuses in recent days, it would be him and Duge Wubai, who broke through Mount Saint Crossing." Many warriors sighed. As one of the 4 secret realms, a genius who could step into the sword tomb would obviously not be a mediocre person. Therefore, some people put this mysterious genius on the same level as Duge Wubai. He really came. On the side of Tianxian College, Suki Miyazaki's beautiful eyes were also slightly shocked. She had always wanted to know the true identity of this person, and now it seemed that she could find out. At this time, not far away in the sky, some flying boats appeared. They were the people who had followed Ye Guqin closely. Among them were Zimo and Qin Lang. That young master really came to the 5 academies competition. Zimo was not stupid. After thinking about the cause and effect, she faintly guessed, and there was shock in her eyes. At this moment, hundreds of thousands of warriors in the square, including many outside the square, were all focused on the figure above the dragon's sword. Breath, silence, the figure slowly raised his hand and slowly untied the belt of his cloak. As he untied it, a calm and indifferent voice came out. "This is the Sword Dynasty 5 Academies competition. I don't want to miss it." As the voice fell, the pitch-black cloak fluttered with the wind. What was revealed was a handsome face. His eyes were deep and his lips were curled into a faint smile. If it was not Ye Guqin, who else could it be? Dead silence, absolute dead silence. It was as if everyone present was frozen in time. Not a single sound was made. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. After a few dozen breaths of time, some cultivators finally came back to their senses, their hoarse voices ringing out. "The mysterious genius who stepped into the sword catacomb is Duge Wubai." Wow! After a short silence, there was a hubbub like a volcanic eruption. How is this possible?" Yin Lin and Yin Su's faces were deathly pale, and their bodies trembled uncontrollably. The mysterious cloaked man turned out to be the sword demon Duge Wubai. Did they almost offend a natural saint? Thinking of this, Yin Lin's legs went soft and she directly collapsed on the ground. She could not imagine what would have happened if she had gone a little too far. Yin Ju was also shocked and his eyes were full of disbelief. "Duge Wubai, how is it possible? He has already passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing, how can he step into the sword catacomb?" Yin Ju's face was tense and he was unwilling to believe it. But the fact was in front of him, he had to believe it. On the other hand, Suki Miyazaki's beautiful face was also stiff and very unnatural. She would never have guessed that the mysterious sovereign who had piqued her curiosity and made her feel a little frustrated was Ye Guqin. Because of Mu Xingzu, Suki Miyazaki had an instinctive dislike for Ye Guqin. But now that the truth was revealed, Suki Miyazaki could not help but believe it. The people who were most shocked were the Divine Cliff team who had followed them here. Although they had already expected this, Zimo's eyes were still wide open and her heart was pounding. She had actually crossed paths with her idol. As for Qin Lang, his face was extremely pale and his forehead was sweating profusely. Thinking of the way he had treated Ye Guqin previously, he felt his legs go soft. He was a Silver Emblem disciple and he dared to treat a Holy Emblem disciple like that. Qin Lang had the urge to roll his eyes and faint. The other members of the Divine Cliff team were also pleasantly surprised. "It's really you." Jian Shisan mumbled to himself in the sky. Kenpo, Jian Shi, and the others were also a little surprised. On the other hand, the sword son from the aristocratic families looked at Yi Guqin with a serious expression. Of course, the people from Sacred Cliff College were the most surprised. Bei Xian Elder, Grand Elder Imei, the 5 temple masters, and the other higher-ups had already known, but they still had smiles on their faces. To be honest, they found it unbelievable that Yi Guqin could step into the sword catacomb. As for the ordinary disciples, they cheered with all their might. Kong Kong, Han Lingxian, Yan Chou Ku, and the others also smiled as if relieved of a heavy burden. Yi Guqin now seemed to have become the backbone of the Sacred Cliff College disciples. As long as Yi Guqin was here, all the Sacred Cliff College disciples would be able to settle down. As for Yi Guqin's enemies, they were unwilling to believe that Yi Guqin had stepped into the sword catacomb. Hua Wuxiu frowned and completely regarded Yi Guqin as the most troublesome enemy. Brother Dugu, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Ling Emoshu did not look too happy. He had still lost to Hua Wuxiu. Don't be discouraged. After all, you've only just recovered from your cultivation. Let me do the rest. Yi Guqin stood on the dragon's sword with a calm expression. Dugu Wubai, I think you've forgotten that the registration date has already passed. Even if you show up, you won't be able to participate. Hua Wuxiu calmed down and said calmly. Although Yi Guqin was the mysterious prodigy, Hua Wuxiu's heart was indeed shaken. But he was still confident that he could suppress Yi Guqin. As soon as he said that, there was a hubbub of discussion in the audience. Indeed, Yi Guqin did bring about a shock. But this could not break the rules of the 5 academies competition. Oh, is that so? I've heard that if you want to participate in the 5 academies competition, there's a special case that allows me to participate. Yi Guqin smiled and said calmly. As soon as he said that, the audience quieted down again. Even Hua Wuxiu raised his eyebrows and looked at Yi Guqin. You mean, yes, it's the mode of 1 man can be 1,000 men. Yi Guqin said, his voice spreading in all directions. Chapter 1006. The 5 Academies tournament had its own rules. Firstly, the participants had to be from the 5 academies. Secondly, they had to register before they could participate in the 5 academies tournament. Although Yi Guqin met the first condition, he missed the opportunity to register because he was cultivating in the sword tomb. Moreover, registration was not allowed to be substituted, so Yi Guqin missed the opportunity. However, there was a special rule in the 5 academies tournament. This special rule was strength of 1,000 men. The so-called strength of 1,000 men mode was to challenge all the heavenly talents in the 5 academies tournament. As long as any heavenly talent chose to activate the strength of 1,000 men mode, he had to accept the challenge of any other heavenly talent. In other words, Yi Guqin activated the strength of 1,000 men mode. All the heavenly talents participating in the 5 academies tournament could challenge him. What was more terrifying was that there was no gap in this kind of challenge. In other words, Yi Guqin could not rest and had to accept the challenge round after round. What was even more abnormal was that this kind of challenge did not limit the number of people. Those who were conceded could choose to challenge Yi Guqin one-on-one. If they did not want to lose face, even a group of people was allowed to besiege him. This was the essence of the strength of 1,000 men mode. However, although this kind of exception existed, no one had activated this mode since the beginning of the 5 academies tournament. Because the difficulty of the strength of 1,000 men mode was too abnormal, no one dared to challenge it. Even someone as strong as Hua Wuxiu did not consider it at all. The gap between the heavenly talents in the top 10 of the sword list was not particularly big. After activating the strength of 1,000 men mode, Hua Wuxiu might be able to defeat 1 or 2 people of the same level, or even 2 or 3 people. However, it was obviously unrealistic for him to challenge everyone. Now, when Yi Guqin's voice was heard, there was dead silence. Everyone's eyes were filled with extreme surprise and amazement. Dugu Wubai is going to activate the strength of 1,000 men mode? Is he serious? Many martial artists looked at each other. In the 5 Academies tournament, there was no precedent for this. Young friend Dugu, don't be impulsive. On the side of Sacred Cliff College, the expressions of the 5 temple masters and many elders changed abruptly. Even Confuzi frowned and said, "Little friend Dugu, you don't have to be like this. The 5 Academies competition is nothing." Obviously, compared to Sacred Cliff College winning first place in the 5 Academies competition, Confuzi did not want anything to happen to Yiguchin. After all, this kind of one-man army mode was the most prone to accidents. If a group of people were to surround him, the slightest lapse in concentration could result in his cultivation being crippled. If a natural-born saint like Yiguchin was crippled, Sacred Cliff College wouldn't even be able to cry. The group of Divine Cliff Academy's disciples spoke one after another after some consideration. "Senior brother Dugu, you don't have to do this. Yes, we all know that you want to win honor for Sacred Cliff College. You don't have to be so stubborn." Although Yiguchin was quite prestigious among the disciples of Sacred Cliff College, one-man army mode was too powerful. However, the mode of one man against 1,000 men was too abnormal. No matter how confident he was in Yiguchin, he was not confident. "Dugu Wubai, you really don't have to fight so hard," Ling Moyin, Han Lingxian, and the others were all worried about Yiguchin. "Ha, Confuzi and Dugu Wubai have such courage. Why do you have to persuade him?" On the side of Tensei College, Hua Yuntao laughed heartily, but he was secretly delighted. He had wanted Hua Wuxiu to cripple Yiguchin in the tournament. Hua Yuntao felt that it was a pity that Yiguchin did not come. Who knew that Yiguchin would actually dig a hole and jump into it himself? Hua Yuntao was naturally happy. In such a chaotic battle, all of Yiguchin's enemies would make a move. It would be too easy to cripple Yiguchin. Not only him, but all of Yiguchin's opponents had the same thought. Ouyang Fengyun, Shengguan Jingshen, Yushuang Yan, Yin Wufeng, Yin Zhu, and so on. Yiguchin's opponents were too many. "Thank you for your concern, but I can still handle this situation," Yiguchin said calmly. As soon as these words came out, the hundreds of thousands of warriors around were speechless. His tone seemed humble, but if one thought about it carefully, it could be said that he was not arrogant. Interesting. Is he looking down on all the heroes in the world? Yin Zhu was so angry that he laughed. They were all prodigies on the sword roll. Not to mention in the Sword Dynasty, even in the 100 Great Dynasties, they were considered top-notch existences. Now, they were being looked down upon by Yiguchin. "Sigh, he's too arrogant." Suki Miyazaki shook her head slightly. She had to admit that she was indeed shocked when she found out that Yiguchin was the mysterious prodigy who had crossed the 10,000 feet mark. But shock aside, in Suki Miyazaki's opinion, Yiguchin's chances of winning were too small for him to challenge the "one man can hold back thousands" mode. Not to mention the others, just Hua Wuxiu alone was enough to make Yiguchin suffer. Of course, this was Suki Miyazaki's opinion. She did not know Yiguchin's ability. Dugu Wubai's move is not very wise. In the sky, Jian Wu frowned. "I believe that brother Dugu has his own ideas." Kenpo did not comment. As for Jian Shisan, he just stared silently at Yiguchin, as if he was thinking about something. In short, everyone present was talking about it, but almost no one thought that Yiguchin would succeed. It was not that they underestimated Yiguchin's strength. But if it was Hua Wuxiu, the chances of success were also very slim. "Dugu Wubai, are you sure you want to activate the "one man can hold back thousands" mode?" A referee asked Yiguchin again. Everyone in the surroundings held their breaths. Everyone from the Divine Cliff Academy was praying in their hearts that Yiguchin would not agree. However, Yiguchin still had a calm smile on his face. The Sword Dynasty is a country where swordsmen gather. There are so many swordsmen. Today, I can fight against all the swordsmen. It's really a great thing in life. How can I not be happy? Yiguchin smiled freely. He was a sword demon and a battle maniac. His swordsmanship could only be improved through the baptism of battle. And after training in the sword tomb, Yiguchin was confident in himself. Well, in that case, wait until the 5 academies ranking is out before you start the challenge, the referee said. Since Yiguchin had chosen the one man can hold back thousands mode, he would be the last. It would be his turn after all the matches were over. If Yiguchin could survive, he would be the first in the 5 academies competition. If he could not, the previous first in the competition would inherit it. In the following time, Yiguchin stood calmly on the dragon's sword in the sky. The rest of the swordsmen's battles also began again. However, most of the people's eyes were still focused on Yiguchin. After all, Yiguchin was the first to choose the one man can hold back thousands mode. I didn't expect to see the one man can hold back thousands mode in this 5 academies competition. Yes, I wonder if Dugu Wubai can succeed in the end. If he succeeds, then Dugu Wubai is really a monster. He broke through the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing and stepped into the sword tomb. TSK, it's exciting just thinking about it. Many warriors were also talking about it. Time continued to pass. The last match was finally over. The last match was between Xuanlian and Hua Wuxiu. It had to be said that Hua Wuxiu was a 7th-class heavenly talent with the sacred body of light and darkness. He was indeed very powerful. Even Xuanlian, who was the 9th sword Buddha, was defeated by Hua Wuxiu by half a move. Of course, only Xuanlian himself knew whether he had used his full strength or not. But all in all, Hua Wuxiu did win the first place in the end. This also agreed with most people's guess. However, there was an anomaly now. The noise of the audience stopped at this moment, and countless eyes looked at Yiguchin in unison. The one man can hold back thousands mode was officially activated. Chapter 1007. At this moment, Yiguchin was the focus of everyone's attention. Worry, anxiety, watching a show, indifference, disdain, insidiousness, there were all kinds of gazes. Facing these gazes, Yiguchin's expression was calm and indifferent. Dugu Wubai, this old man will warn you again. The one man can hold thousands mode can't guarantee your safety because you might be attacked by a group. The judge warned him again. He could be considered to be on the side of rogue cultivators, so he reminded him again. Thank you for the reminder. I understand. Yiguchin said indifferently. Well then, you have 2 ways to succeed in the one mount against thousands mode. The first is to survive for 3 days. As long as you can last for 3 days, you win. The second is to fight until no one dares to challenge you, or defeat everyone. These were the 2 ways to win in the one mount against thousands mode. In comparison, everyone felt that the first way to succeed was barely acceptable. The premise was that Yiguchin had the strength to last for 3 days. After all, in these 3 days, almost all of Yiguchin's enemies would attack. As for the second way, no one thought it would appear. It was too difficult for Yiguchin to defeat everyone or make everyone not dare to challenge him. Even Hua Wuxiu couldn't subdue all the prodigies. If you're ready, then let's begin. The referee sighed. Yiguchin stood in the sky. In the clouds, there was a faint rumble of thunder, as if a storm was coming. With a sword in hand, the clouds in all directions move. Let me ask the world, who is the hero? I, Dugu Wubai, am here to challenge all the prodigies of the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty. All of you, go. Yiguchin let out a loud shout. At the same time, there was a rumble. A bolt of lightning streaked across the sky, and the rumbling of thunder seemed to echo Yiguchin's words. One person. Challenging all the prodigies of the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty. This scene made everyone's blood boil. Senior Dugu is invincible. Senior brother Dugu is mighty. All the Sacred Cliff College students roared madly. Who among the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty was as arrogant as Yiguchin? Among the geniuses of the Sword Dynasty, who had Yiguchin's boldness? Upon hearing this, Hua Wuxiu, Yin Ju, and Shengguan Jingshan's faces darkened. However, they did not attack directly. This was because they couldn't gauge Yiguchin's strength. After all, Yiguchen had stepped into the sword tomb before. No one would believe that his strength had not improved. Moreover, Hua Wuxiu and the others were not willing to be the first to act and be the one to test the sword. Therefore, in this strange silence, no one actually made the first move. This caused whispers to ring out from the crowd. Those who did not know better would think that Yiguchen alone was enough to make all the prodigies not dare to make the first move. At this moment, Hua Wuxiu's lips moved slightly as he secretly transmitted his voice. He was meticulous and would never underestimate any opponent. Therefore, he would not be the first to act. After Hua Wuxiu transmitted his voice, some of the Tensei College prodigies also stepped forward one by one. Although they were not as strong as the top 10 on the sword leaderboard, many of them were still in the top 50. Finally, a prodigy stepped into the air and attacked Yiguchen. Upon seeing this person, Yiguchen's lips curled into a faint smile. He also understood that someone like Hua Wuxiu would not be the first to act. Yiguchen raised his hand, and vigorous true energy gushed out from his meridians. Sword chi shot out from his finger and directly sent that prodigy flying. Following that, more and more prodigies stepped forward. Not only Tensei College, but also Sun Moon College and Long River College also had prodigies step forward. No one from Tianxian College made a move. Naturally, no one from Sacred Cliff College would make a move. In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen prodigies stepped forward. The strength of these dozen prodigies was mostly at the 9th level of the spirit bridge of heaven and earth. Yiguchen's true energy burst out, and the 6-pulse divine sword was displayed one after another. Yiguchen's sword chi shot out from between his fingers and pierced through the air. One prodigy after another was sent flying, spitting out blood. Tiandi Lingxiao. As soon as Yiguchen made a move, his strength was also perceived by everyone. It's only been a few months, and he has broken through to the 7th level. This speed is indeed fast. Yes, it is indeed surprising that a Divine Dwelling stage expert has battle power comparable to that of a level 7 Divine Dwelling expert. However, it is still a little too much for him to fight against Hua Wuxiu and the others, right? Many people were discussing. Tiandi Lingxiao. Hua Wuxiu's lips curved into a cold smile. On the other side of the sky, Jian Wu and the others frowned. Although Yiguchen's cultivation level had improved very quickly, he was still at a disadvantage before reaching the Divine Dwelling stage. Believe in Brother Dugu. Kenpo had some confidence. The prodigies who had stepped forward were all at the spirit bridge of heaven and earth stage, and they could not pose any threat to Yiguchen. Let me fight you. A cold and harsh voice sounded. It was Yushuang Yan. After studying at Tensei College, her strength had also greatly improved. Not only her, but Hua Shengjie, Yin Wufeng and the others had also participated in the 5 academies competition. At this moment, they had all stepped forward. These people were the enemies who had competed with Yiguchen in the 5 academies selection. At that time, these people could still pose some obstacles to Yiguchen. But now, looking at the people besieging him, Yiguchen's expression was indifferent, without the slightest ripple. He did not even bring out the 9-dragon thunder prison, but took out another top-grade mystical rune weapon. 3 ultimate sacred swords, Star Breaker Sword. The vigorous genuine chi, accompanied by the star-like sword light, swept toward these people. Feeling the fierce fluctuations of the sword light, Hua Shengjie, Yushuang Yan, and Yin Wufeng's expressions changed. Yiguchen's strength, after going through the baptism of Mount Saint Crossing and the Sword Tomb, was no longer the same as before. Ice Soul Heavenly River Sword. 9 Hell Sword. Heaven Conquering Sword. The 3 people's chi burst out, and they all used their trump cards. With a loud bang, the sword chi collided, bursting out ripples, and swept the surrounding void. The 3 people were directly knocked back. Yiguchen's sword sign changed again. 3 ultimate sacred swords, Star Breaker Sword. 2 swords combine, Star Sun Flowing Fire. Yiguchen used the combination of the Star Breaking Sword and the Qian Yang Sword, the Star Sun Flowing Fire. The mighty and blazing sword light swept out like flowing magma. Ah! It was accompanied by vomiting blood and screams. Hua Shengjie, Yin Wufeng, and Yushuang Yan were shot down from the sky and smashed hard on the ground. Their bodies were charred black, and their limbs twitched non-stop. One move had almost crippled the three geniuses. Dead silence. The whole place was dead silent. When some of the geniuses saw this, they secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Although Hua Shengjie and the others were not in the top 10 geniuses of the sword roll, they were definitely not mediocre people. But now, the three of them together could not even touch the corner of Yi Guqin's clothes. How? How is this possible? In the pit on the ground, Yushuang Yan vomited blood, and her cold eyes were filled with disbelief. During the 5 Academy selection, they could still fight back and forth with Yi Guqin. But now, the three of them together could not even take one move from Yi Guqin. You don't have to send these small fries to test me. If you want to fight, come at me. Yi Guqin said indifferently. Hearing these words, Hua Shengjie and the others felt their hearts being attacked, causing them to vomit blood again. Ah! I didn't have the chance to fight to my heart's content in the ancient chaos wasteland. This time, I finally have the chance. Dugu Wubai, let me see if your strength is worthy of your arrogance. A man in white walked out with a majestic gait. His aura burst forth, and his battle intent was astonishing. It was Ouyang Fengyun, ranked 9th on the sword roll. Finally, a top 10 genius on the sword roll is going to fight. That was just a warm-up. This is the main show. Something to watch. Seeing that Ouyang Fengyun was about to fight, everyone present perked up. They were very curious. Would Yi Guqin be able to withstand a true top 10 genius on the sword roll, a divine dwelling realm genius? Chapter 1008. Ouyang Fengyun. Seeing Ouyang Fengyun step out, Yi Guqin's eyes also surged with coldness. He didn't forget that if Ouyang Fengyun hadn't interfered halfway in the ancient chaos wasteland, he might have been able to obtain 2 map fragments. One must know that there were also heaven prides from other empires at that time. Ouyang Fengyun didn't care about the big picture and didn't hesitate to fight among himself to deal with Yi Guqin for his own personal gain. Therefore, when Ouyang Fengyun attacked, Yi Guqin's eyes only had coldness in them. Ouyang Fengyun, you actually dared to take the initiative to attack. Since that's the case, I'll grant you your wish. Yi Guqin's eyes shot out a sharp light. The mystical rune weapon in his hand spun, and a sword light shot out. Impudent, what right do you have to speak in such a tone? Ouyang Fengyun rebuked angrily. Yi Guqin's words seemed to put Ouyang Fengyun in a lower position. But in fact, with Yi Guqin's current strength, there was indeed no need for him to be afraid of Ouyang Fengyun. Ouyang Fengyun activated the emperor-grade cultivation technique of the Ouyang family, the Longhu's secret manual. The true qi of the first level of the divine dwelling realm burst out, faintly forming the shape of a dragon and a tiger around him. It was a different type of true qi, the Longhu Grand True Qi. Cloud Dragon Sword, out. Ouyang Fengyun summoned the Cloud Dragon Sword at the same time, and it collided with Yi Guqin's sword light. A clanging sound burst forth, piercing through the clouds. Ouyang Fengyun charged forward with his sword, while Yi Guqin's figure rose from the top of the dragon sword. A sword light turned into a river of stars and swept towards Ouyang Fengyun. Dragon Swimming Sword Technique, dragon swimming in 4 directions. Ouyang Fengyun changed his sword technique, and sword qi swept out in all directions. Rumble. 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 The two figures collided like 2 great stars, erupting with a violent rumble, and transparent sword qi ripples sweeping out in all directions. Looking at the 2 people who were locked in battle, exclamations of surprise sounded out from the surroundings of the sword battle plaza. He actually withstood it. Dugu Wubai is only at the 7th level, but he's able to fight on par with the divine dwelling heaven pride. Many people's eyes were filled with surprise. It wasn't easy to challenge someone of a higher level. Let's not forget that it was an entire cultivation realm. After exchanging blows, Ouyang Fengyun's face darkened. Yi Gu-chen's current strength was obviously stronger than when he was in the ancient chaos wasteland. Ouyang Fengyun could clearly feel the pressure. Although he couldn't openly kill Yi Gu-chen, it was enough to cripple Yi Gu-chen. He seemed to have seen the coldness in Ouyang Fengyun's eyes. Yi Gu-chen smiled indifferently. Do you want to cripple me? Come at me. Don't be so arrogant, Cloud Sword Wei. Ouyang Fengyun's expression turned fierce as he released the Cloud Sword Wei's sword domain, Cloud Mountain Mist Sea. In an instant, the sword chi around his body turned into clouds and spread out. Dragon Swimming Sword Art, Dragon Roars to the Nine Heavens. Ouyang Fengyun's sword technique changed again, and the Cloud Dragon's sword in his hand repeatedly thrust out. The surrounding clouds and mist tumbled, turning into mist dragons that charged towards Yi Gu-chen with endless sword chi. Star Breaker Sword, Moon Sword, Star and Moon Reversal. Yi Gu-chen successively used 2 of the 3 ultimate holy swords and then merged them together. In an instant, the stars and moon appeared in the void at the same time, protecting Yi Gu-chen's body. The Cloud Dragon's sword chi collided with the shadows of the stars and moon, bursting out endless waves of sword chi. At that moment, another sword suddenly rushed out from the thick clouds and mist. The sword shook the void as if it was letting out a tiger's roar. Oh no! The hearts of many Sacred Cliff College's disciples suddenly rose. There was actually a sword hidden within the clouds. This was something that no one had expected. Wind Tiger Sword, kill! Ouyang Fengyun sneered. The Wind Tiger Sword seemed to have pierced through the void and stabbed towards Yi Gu-chen's back. Humph! Yi Gu-chen snorted. His body shook, and the dazzling 9-colored lightning in his body surged out and rushed towards the Wind Tiger Sword. It was the power of the 9-colored lightning. Rumble! The Wind Tiger Sword collided with the 9-colored lightning and its speed instantly slowed down. Yi Gu-chen took the opportunity to use Imminent Skyline. His body flashed and slashed towards Ouyang Fengyun's head. Terrifying lightning vibrated on the blade and spread out in all directions. It was the Divine Sword Art's Thunder Control Technique special skill, Myriad Thunder. Dragon Swimming Sword Art, Dragon Roaring in the Nine Heavens. Ouyang Fengyun's expression changed when he saw it. As the blade moved, there seemed to be a dragon's roar and sword chi gushed out. At the same time, Ouyang Fengyun activated another sword principle. Wind Sword Principle, Wind Shadow Step. Ouyang Fengyun also knew 2 sword principles. He even used the Wind Sword Principle. It seems that Ouyang Fengyun is going all out. Some of the warriors saw this and could not help but sigh. Ouyang Fengyun was like his name. He knew both the Wind Sword Principle and the Cloud Sword Principle. Normally, Ouyang Fengyun would only use 1 sword principle. If he used 2 sword principles at the same time, it meant that he was going all out. You actually forced me to use my Wind Sword Principle. Dugu Wubai, you are indeed capable. However, this is the end. Ouyang Fengyun's expression was cold. He did not expect that he would have to go all out to deal with Yi Gu-chen. Go all out. Otherwise, you won't have a chance. Yi Gu-chen's expression was still indifferent. Wind Sword Principle, Sky Slash. Ouyang Fengyun shouted coldly. He held the Cloud Dragon Sword and the Wind Tiger Sword in both hands and slashed towards Yi Gu-chen's head at the same time. With the support of the Wind Sword Principle, the sword was extremely fast. It was as if it could really cut through the void. Its speed was extremely fast. Divine Sword Lightning Controlling Technique, Heavenly Thunder Attraction. Yi Gu-chen raised his sword and pointed it at the sky. In an instant, there was a loud roar in the sky. The sky, which was already covered by dark clouds, was filled with rolling thunder. Then, a thunderbolt suddenly came down and was drawn into the sword blade. This move, Heavenly Thunder Attraction, was the ultimate killing move of the Divine Sword Lightning Controlling Technique. It was extremely powerful. Kill! The 2 sword moves collided again. One side was drawing the power of the heavenly thunder, while the other side was supporting the power of the wind sword principle. With a loud bang, it was as if a big star had exploded. Violent air shock waves swept in all directions. Confuzi and the other pseudo-saints frowned slightly. They waved one hand to block the void in all directions. Only then did the battle fluctuations not spread out. And in the midst of such an extreme collision, the two figures retreated at the same time. Ouyang Fengyun's body trembled and he felt numb all over. His sword-holding arm was even charred black. His chest shook violently, and he could not help but cough up a mouthful of blood. On the other side, Yiguchen was also shaken back, but his situation was much better than Ouyang Fengyun's. After all, his physical body was stronger than Ouyang Fengyun's. Again, Yiguchen's fighter jet was very powerful. Seeing Ouyang Fengyun in a disadvantageous position, he immediately rushed forward again. Damn it, Dugu Wubai, you're too arrogant. Seeing Yiguchen closing in, Ouyang Fengyun was furious. He had never been in such a sorry state. The cloud follows the dragon, the wind follows the tiger. Wind and cloud realm, the sword breaks the sky. Ouyang Fengyun gathered all the genuine qi in his body. The two swords, Cloud Dragon and Wind Tiger, merged into one and turned into a sword. An extremely powerful sword qi fluctuation uncontrollably spread out, causing the surrounding space to emit a crackling sound. Ouyang Fengyun is going to fight with all his strength. Seeing this scene, all the cultivators present were unable to take their eyes off it. They did not even blink, afraid that they would miss this wonderful scene. Could Ouyang Fengyun defeat Yiguchen with all his strength? Chapter 1009. Ouyang Fengyun was ranked 9th on the sword leaderboard. His strength was obvious to all. Now, Yiguchen was able to force Ouyang Fengyun to such an extent. This was something no one had expected. Dugu Wubai was able to pass the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. It seems that it's not just because of his spiritual will. His strength is definitely not weak. Many warriors sighed in their hearts when they saw this. Previously, the crowd had not been able to figure out Yiguchen's strength. Coupled with the smearing of the Hua family and other pseudo-saint families, many people also believed that Yiguchen had only relied on his strong spiritual will to pass the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. But now, Yiguchen's performance had completely silenced those who questioned him. I wonder if Dugu Wubai will be able to take Ouyang Fengyun's move. Many people were watching intently. At this moment, Ouyang Fengyun was simultaneously augmenting his wind sword principle and cloud sword principle. Although he could not combine the two sword principles, the power released at this moment was enough to shock people. Dugu Wubai, can you take this move of mine? Ouyang Fengyun roared. Clouds follow the dragon, wind follows the tiger. Wind cloud realm, sword piercing the firmament. The two swords combined into one, augmented by the power of dual sword principles, and slashed horizontally at Yiguchen. In an instant, the wind and clouds shook and the sky changed color. Ouyang Fengyun's sword was extremely powerful. Even those prodigies who had not yet made a move, such as Hua Wuxiu, Jiang Fengmian, Shangguan Jingshan, and Yin Zhu, frowned slightly. Even they had to treat this move with caution. In the face of Ouyang Fengyun's powerful trump card, Yiguchen was not afraid at all. There was no change in his expression at all. Once again, he unleashed the three ultimate holy swords. However, this time around, it was different from before. Yiguchen first used the Earth-Moon Absolute Sword, and a blue crescent-like sword light spread out. Following that, Yiguchen once again displayed the Absolute Sword of Qianyang. The blazing sword light was as dazzling as the sun. Qianyang Absolute Sword, Kuan-Yu Absolute Sword, combined the two swords, Qian Kuan Extermination. Yiguchen raised his sword and a powerful sword qi surged out. Qianyang and Kuan-Yu merged into one in the void. In the blink of an eye, an even more ferocious wave of sword qi spread out. It was the combination of the two moves, Universe Annihilation. This was already an extremely powerful move of the three Absolutes Holy Swords. It was second only to the fusion of the three moves. The sword that carried the power of the sun and moon collided with Ouyang Fengyun's ultimate move. Rumble. A blinding light burst out, bringing with it a destructive ripple that swept out in all directions. If it weren't for the false sage experts, the aftermath would have been enough to injure the group of heaven and earth spiritual bridge skyprides around the sword battle square. The dazzling sword light burst out. Everyone squinted their eyes, wanting to see the outcome. In the violent collision, the two figures retreated at the same time. However, Yi Guqin was forced to retreat. Ouyang Fengyun, on the other hand, spat out blood like a kite with a broken string and flew out. A huge sword scar appeared on his chest, and one could almost see his sternum. It looked extremely terrifying. Defeated. Ouyang Fengyun has been defeated. After the collision of the two moves, there was a moment of dead silence. Then, there was a deafening uproar. The sky pride of the Ouyang family, Ouyang Fengyun, who ranked 9th on the sword leaderboard, had been defeated by Yi Guqin. In the spectator stands, Ouyang Tianji, who had been defeated by Ling Imo Shu, widened his eyes in disbelief. How is this possible? How can Big Brother be defeated by him? Rumble. Ouyang Fengyun fell from the sky and smashed hard on the arena. He kept vomiting blood, which dyed the front of his clothes red. Not to mention the others, even Ouyang Fengyun himself could not believe it. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at Yi Guqin in the sky. In the ancient chaos wasteland, he thought that Yi Guqin was just a so-so. But now, the one who was beaten like a dead dog was him. Senior brother Dugu is mighty. The disciples of Sacred Cliff College heaved a sigh of relief and cheered loudly. No matter what, Yi Guqin had proven himself. However, in the face of all kinds of exclamations and astonishment, Yi Guqin's expression was calm. Defeating Ouyang Fengyun was nothing to him. Then, the scene fell into a strange silence again. After Yi Guqin defeated Ouyang Fengyun, some heaven prides did not dare to casually attack Yi Guqin. At least the heaven prides below the divine dwelling stage looked at Yi Guqin with fear in their eyes as if they were looking at a ghost. Hua Wuxiu took a deep look at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin was more difficult to deal with than he had imagined. But he still did not choose to attack. Dugu Wubai, you said that you would eliminate me on Mount Saint Crossing. Then let me fight you. A red-haired man dressed in red armor stepped out. He carried a blood-red sword as tall as a person on his back. It was Shengguan Jingshan. Whether it was because of Yi Guqin's words or because of Mu Xingzu, Shengguan Jingshan could not avoid a battle with Yi Guqin. Although Yi Guqin had defeated Ouyang Fengyun was ranked 9th on the sword list after all. And Shengguan Jingshan was ranked 7th on the sword list. There was still a certain gap between them. Moreover, Shengguan Jingshan was confident in himself. Seeing Shengguan Jingshan make a move, the atmosphere of the entire sword duel plaza rose again. Shengguan Jingshan was clearly stronger than Ouyang Fengyun. Cousin, are you alright? In the stands, Shengguan Yan showed a worried look. Shengguan Yan did not think that Yi Guqin would be a match for Shengguan Jingshan. But now, Shengguan Yan was a little nervous. Seeing Shengguan Jingshan step forward, Yi Guqin's expression was equally calm. He said calmly, since Xingzhu doesn't like you, if you lose this battle, you're not allowed to pester Xingzhu anymore. These slightly domineering words made Mu Xingzhu blush slightly. Her heart was filled with sweetness. Oh, little girl, are you shy? Ying Lang could not help but tease. Shengguan Jingshan is not that simple. It won't be that easy for Dugu Wubai to defeat him either. Not to mention, he also suffered some damage from his previous battle with Ouyang Fengyun. A cold voice sounded. It was Suki Miyazaki. You don't have to worry about that. My master will definitely succeed. Mu Xingzu raised her eyebrows. Then let's wait and see. Suki Miyazaki did not say much. Now that the 7th on the sword leaderboard had appeared, everyone's attention was focused on him again. Alright, whoever loses this battle will stay away from Xingzhu. Shengguan Jingshan stomped his foot, and an explosive sound rang out. A powerful rebound force sent him shooting high into the sky like a cannonball. He took out the quasi-tribulation divine weapon on his back, the Balrog Sharktooth sword. Vigorous flame true chi burst forth, causing the entire sword to burn with flames. Overlord slash. Shangguan Jingshan held the sword with both hands and slashed it toward Yiguchen. Vigorous flaming sword chi burst forth, as if forming a wave of fire that swept out. A wave of scorching heat spread in all directions. It was obvious that Shangguan Jingshan cultivated a fire attribute cultivation technique. Moreover, the path of his sword was different from Ouyang Fengyun's. Ouyang Fengyun's was nimble and ethereal, and the wind and clouds changed constantly. Shangguan Jingshan, on the other hand, was strong enough to break through 10 techniques. The path of his sword was extremely domineering. Every strike was as heavy as 1,000 pounds, and carried with it scorching heat. Yiguchen was not careless in the face of such an ultimate move. He immediately displayed the sword domain of the edgeless way of the sword, the gravity sword domain. In the void, an ancient divine mountain appeared, and a heavy force pressed down on Shangguan Jingshan. What? Another peerless way of the sword? A single stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. Everyone present was dumbfounded. They had no idea how many ways of the sword Yiguchen had mastered. Chapter 10:10. The Sword Dynasty was a country of sword cultivators, so Sword Dao was not very rare. However, Sword Dao was also divided into 3 grades. The ordinary grade of Sword Dao was still considered common. However, the peerless grade of Sword Dao was rare. It was already very good for a prodigy on the sword ranking to possess a peerless Sword Dao. But now, Yiguchen had once again displayed a completely different kind of peerless swordsmanship. This caused the martial artist's pupils to shrink, and they all gasped. Zimo, Qin Lang, and the others who were watching the battle from the spectator stands were also stunned. They knew that Yiguchen had not displayed the Shura Sword Dao in the Sword Catacomb, but 2 other types of Sword Dao. In other words, senior brother Dugu possesses 3 types of peerless Sword Dao. Zimo muttered involuntarily. With 3 types of peerless Sword Dao, even among the prodigies of the Sword Dynasty, he was one of a kind. Dugu Wubai has other types of peerless Sword Dao besides the Shura Sword Dao. Many of Yiguchen's opponents were shocked. Even Hua Wuxiu looked at Yiguchen in surprise. To be honest, Yiguchen had not used his full strength in the Sword Dynasty. Therefore, many people did not know about his trump cards. This was also the reason why Hua Wuxiu did not make the first move. He wanted to let the others test Yiguchen's trump cards. Now, Yiguchen had finally revealed some of his trump cards. The moment Yiguchen displayed the gravity sword domain, Shangguan Jingshan felt a heavy pressure sweep over him. The gravity around him was like a mountain pressing down on him. Shangguan Jingshan's strength, speed, sword momentum, and so on were all weakened and suppressed. What can these unorthodox methods do to me? Shangguan Jingshan roared. Once again, vigorous flaming true energy burst out from his body, causing the surrounding space to slightly distort. That's the Shangguan clan's emperor-level cultivation technique, the overbearing flame god's strength. Shangguan Jingshan soared into the sky with the support of the emperor-level cultivation method. The Balrog Sharktooth greatsword slashed at Yiguchen. Yiguchen wielded his mystical rune divine weapon and executed the star-breaking sword of absolute annihilation, similarly sweeping out. Their swords collided in an instant. Instantly, Yiguchen felt an extremely heavy pressure crushing down along the edge of the sword. The Balrog Sharktooth sword was a heavy sword. With the addition of Shangguan Jingshan's strength, the Balrog Sharktooth sword was a heavy sword. This overlord's chop was powerful and heavy. It had a ferocious momentum that could break through 1,000 mountains. Even if he used the gravity sword domain, he could only offset part of it. Even Yiguchen's mystical rune divine weapon was bent from the force. Boom! Both of them retreated. However, in the next moment, they collided again like shooting stars. Clang! 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 Continuous clanging sounds rang out. It was like the violent sound of iron being forged in the heavenly realm's weapon refining room. It broke through the void and shook everyone's eardrums. Shangguan Jingshan is indeed worthy of being ranked 7th on the sword leaderboard. He's even stronger than Ouyang Fengyun. As he attacked, Ye Guqin pondered in his heart. Although there was not a huge gap between the top 10 on the sword leaderboard, there was still a gap in their strength. Moreover, each of the top 10 prodigies focused on different things. For example, Shangguan Jingshan walked the path of heavy sword strength. Ye Guqin continued to use the gravity sword domain. Waves of spatial vibration sword waves spread out. Even though Shangguan Jingshan was wearing the flame god's armor, he could only weaken it but not block it. Damn it! What kind of peerless sword principle is this? I've never seen it before. Shangguan Jingshan's eyes darkened. The edgeless sword principle was a sword principle created by Dugu Wubai. It was impossible for Shangguan Jingshan to have seen it before. Moreover, the gravity sword domain was constantly suppressing Shangguan Jingshan, making it impossible for him to use his full strength. Heavenly Fire 10 consecutive slashes. Shangguan Jingshan roared and activated the flame god's overbearing flame god force to the extreme. He swung his sword 10 times in a row. Each strike was stronger than the previous one. It was like overlapping waves. Ye Guqin's sword blade shot out 9-colored thunder. He once again used the godly sword lightning controlling technique. Thunder and lightning burst out of the sword as he fought with Shangguan Jingshan. Now, the God-slaying sword and celestial slaying sword, the two supreme king sword principles, were slightly insufficient for Ye Guqin. Of course, the combination of the two emperor sword principles was still very powerful. Boom! 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 The sound of a violent collision resounded through the universe. It had to be said that Shangguan Jingshan's strength was indeed not something Ouyang Fengyun could compare to. More importantly, Shangguan Jingshan seemed to also pay attention to the cultivation of his physical body. Therefore, even under the pressure of the gravity sword domain, his physical body was not suppressed too much. Boom! After another collision, Ye Guqin's figure retreated. The mystical rune weapon in his hand was faintly cracking. Dugu Wubai, you're too arrogant. Watch me defeat you with one strike. Shangguan Jingshan shouted coldly. In his opinion, Ye Guqin still did not use the 9-dragon thunder prison because he was looking down on him. Therefore, Shangguan Jingshan was determined to use his ultimate move to defeat Ye Guqin with one strike. Flame God Slash. Shangguan Jingshan held the sword with both hands and raised it to the sky. The flame god slash in his body circulated crazily, and an extremely terrifying flame chi gushed out. He slashed out with his sword, forming a flame sword chi that was hundreds of feet long. It slashed down on Ye Guqin's head. The power of this move was shocking. Senior brother Dugu. All the Sacred Cliff College disciples' hearts were in their mouths, and they were worried for Ye Guqin. In the face of Shangguan Jingshan's ultimate move, Ye Guqin was not afraid. He let go of the mystical rune weapon in his hand and let it float in the void. Then, he raised his left hand and used the God-slaying sword technique. He raised his right hand and used the immortal slaying sword technique. God slaying, immortal slaying, immortal slaying, immortal slaying. Ye Guqin clasped his palms together, and a terrifying sword chi gushed out, as if showing the tragic scene of an immortal slaying and weeping blood. The sword fiercely collided with Shangguan Jingshan's ultimate move. Boom! A giant mushroom cloud burst into the void, forming a ring of air waves that swept in all directions. Ye Guqin's body shook, and he coughed up some blood. On the other side, Shangguan Jingshan was also injured. The web between his thumb and index finger where he held the sword cracked, and blood flowed out. This time, they were evenly matched again. Dugu Wubai's physical body is not inferior to Shangguan Jingshan's at all. Seeing this scene, many martial artists were shocked. Shangguan Jingshan's physical strength was one of the best even among the top 10 prodigies on the sword roll. However, they did not know that Ye Guqin had the perfect physical body, the flawless diamond body, and the ancient god body. Although Yiguchen's body looked thin and well-proportioned, his true strength was definitely superior to Shangguan Jingshen's. Dugu Wubai, you do have some skills, but that's all you can do. Shangguan Jingshen raised one hand, and a ghostly green flame rose. That's the bone-melting spiritual fire. Rumor has it that if one touches it, one's body and bones will be burned to ashes. When they saw Shangguan Jingshen's ghostly green flame, many of the martial artists present had a look of fear in their eyes. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.